IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's Wednesday, midweek rundown time. Got a lot to talk about today. Going to have some fun with today's topics. Want to apologize at the beginning. I know we got this thing started late, was having some issues with getting the buy, sell, hold questions submitted over and being able to show up. But we are good now, so buy, sell, and hold is still on for the end of the show. That's going to be fun. You can tell we're getting close to the season because of how excited a lot of people are. There's certain parts of the fan base, and this is true for every fan base. You know, every fan base has the fans that are just always excited, and then there's the ones that are always negative, and then in between there's like the fans that are like, well, I'm going to keep an open mind, but then as you get closer to the season, they kind of go in one direction or the other. A lot of them go in the more positive manner, especially when you have the kind of team that we think Notre Dame is going to have coming back this season. But you can tell we're getting close to the season because of the nature of some of the submissions today. We're very positive submissions. There's no doubt about that. So we're going to have some fun with the buy, sell, or hold at the end of the show. But first, we're going to sort of have a two-part segment today talking about line play. As I mentioned yesterday, we're kind of kicking off our preview of the season of the 2024 season. Yesterday, we kind of kicked it off with the year 3 expectations, and that's just going to kind of go through all summer. We're just going to preview the team. And I felt like, okay, well, how do we kick this? How do we kick off things beyond just, okay, here's expectations and talk big picture all year? And what are the different aspects we're going to talk about? And I've got this long list of topics that we're going to try to get to all of them this summer. I was like, what can be the first thing that we talk about after laying the groundwork for expectations for the year, right? So we went macro. What's a little bit of way to go a little bit micro, a little bit? Let's get into the details of this team. So I got to take the head coach's advice, right? You got to talk about what he says is the most important thing. And Marcus Freeman has said since he was hired that this is going to be a line-driven program. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the offense and defensive line, but we're not going to look at it so much from the standpoint of like breaking down the roster and specifics of the roster. We'll do that as we get closer to the fall camp, and we'll do like our position previews and things along those lines. I'm going to look at this more from a coaching standpoint, and we're going to talk about Joe Rudolph and Al Washington. That's what today's show is going to be about, and the challenges that both of them have in front of them this season, and what they both need to show. And it's a very different situation when you look at these two football coaches. Look, in 2024, Notre Dame can't be the team that we all hope they're going to be if both lines don't play pretty well, especially in the big games. Look, we're going to talk about the offensive line and the tasks that they have in front of them. The defensive line obviously has to be the foundation of an elite defense. But when you look at the makeup of the schedule, it's going to be very important that these two parts of the football team play well. But even more so, once you get to the postseason, these groups are going to have to play well, because when you look around the country and you see a lot of the top teams around the country, they're expected to have pretty good lines this season. Ohio State's going to have one of the best defensive lines in college football, in my opinion. I know they lost Michael Hall, but they got just about everybody else coming back. And I know they lost a couple good linebackers, but you've got some really talented young players stepping into the mold, a lot like Notre Dame, because, when we talked about Notre Dame's big-time linebacker class a couple years ago, 2 years in a row, they had great linebacker classes. Well, the Buckeyes were similar in that regard, where they had landed some very good talented linebackers, and now it's time for those guys to step in and be players for them. And so they're going to have a really good front seven. Georgia's going to have a front seven, and Georgia's going to have a very good offensive line. Ohio State's offensive line is not as good as Georgia's. It's not as talented as Notre Dame's, but it's experienced. It's got enough. I mean, Donovan Jackson's an NFL player. I really like Carson Hinsman. The tackles are solid players. And, of course, you're now going to be running Chip Kelly's offense, which is going to help them to play better. Texas should be much better on the offensive line this season. And if Notre Dame plays Texas in the postseason, your defensive line is going to be challenged in a way that like you haven't all season. It's got a chance to be a very outstanding offensive line. The Texas defensive line on the edge should be pretty good. Up the middle, we'll see. But by the time you get to the postseason, I expect that group to be pretty good. And you're going to have to be very good because that Texas offense is going to be dynamic. And then you just kind of go down the lines. Oregon should be really good along both trenches. Penn State's got a chance to be pretty good in their front seven. So you just look at a lot of the top teams in college football. Ole Miss had a great offseason when it comes to building up both of their lines through the transfer portal and then guys coming back. So no matter how you go down through it, Bama's still going to be very talented on both lines. If you want to win a championship, if you even want to be competitive for a championship, you're going to have to play really well along both lines. There's no doubt about it. And so if Notre Dame is going to be the team that we hope they are going to be, if Notre Dame's going to live up to the expectations we talked about yesterday, a lot of things have to happen. There's no like, if this unit plays well, they're going to be a championship team. No, to be a championship team, you need all the pieces to play well together. But one position group on each side of the ball can be the thing that keeps you from being a championship team. So, like, the O-line playing great does not make the offense a championship caliber unit. The quarterback's got to play well. The running back's got to play well. The receivers and tight ends got to play well. D-line could be outstanding this year, but if the linebackers miss a million tackles and the secondary is not good in coverage and they don't, they're not playing at a high level, I don't care how good the D-line is, you're not going to be a championship football team. The reverse is true. You can lose a championship. You cannot be a big-time program in a season if one position group at an important place isn't good. Quarterback's that way. Line is that way on offense. And then, cornerback and the defensive line can be that way on defense. So Notre Dame is going to have to play well on both lines. And then that, to me, makes everything around you better. So, yes, you can't win just because of what you do along the lines. But if you are playing well along the lines, it certainly has a positive impact on all those other positions. It takes some of the pressure off the quarterback. It allows him to be more effective on offense. It opens up more holes for the running backs. It allows the pass game to be better. On the reverse side, if your defensive line is playing at an elite level, your linebackers are not getting blocked a lot. Your secondary is being able to cover a lot less. So there's a lot of different aspects of it that you look at this team and say, hey, look, you could lose some games. You could not be a championship team because of your line. You can't be one just because of your line. But, man, if your lines are good, it makes life way easier for everybody else. And that's where Notre Dame is at as they enter the 2024 season. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. We'll dive into each position. We'll talk O-line first. We'll probably spend a little bit more time there because there's more questions there. And then we'll talk about the defense, defensive line, which was very good last season. But also it's a unit that can and needs to still get better if they're going to be sort of that elite type. Well, you look at the impact of like what Michigan's D-line had on their team last year, or what Georgia's defensive line had on their team in 2021, or what Clemson's D-line had on their team in 2018, and on and on and on. So can they get to that level? Well, they're not at that level yet. They can, but in order to get there, some things have to get better, and we'll talk about those as well. And then, of course, we'll wrap things up with our buy, sell, or hold. So I'm excited. I know we got started a little bit late, but I think it's going to be worth it because I think we're going to have some fun today talking about Notre Dame's offensive line, defensive line, and jumping into the buy, sell, hold. So we'll talk first about the offensive line, because when we talk about the defensive line, I think we all know there's like a floor for the D-line that we can all kind of expect them to at least be here. The question is, will they be elite? They're going to be very good. I think most of us can agree on that the defensive line is going to at least be very good. With the offensive line, I don't know that we know what it's going to be. I think there's hope. There's optimism. I'm very optimistic about this line. I think this line has a chance to be pretty good this season. Will it be game 1? Will it be game 3? Will it not happen until game 8? Oh, we'll find out. But I do think this line has a chance to be good, but that is pure 100% projection based off A, talent evaluation, and B, what we saw from this group in one game. But as we have talked about a lot, you have to be careful not putting too much into a bowl game. It's a unique situation. Oregon State was going through a coaching change. Their D coordinator all season was now going to be the program's new head coach, so he didn't coach them during the bowl game, which I thought was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life. Their Jonathan Smith that left for Michigan State. They had lost a lot of guys in the back 7. Their front 4 stayed intact, with I think one exception of a defensive tackle, a backup or rotation defensive tackle who opted out, but the rest of their D-line stayed intact. So you have to be careful about putting too much on it. So when you break down that game, you say, boy, we've seen, and I've made this argument, like they're not a complete unknown. This offensive line is not a complete unknown. We've seen this group play together before, and we saw this group play together as an expected starting 5. Now, there could be a couple changes, but if those changes happen, it means that the line's going to be even better. But we saw the 5 starters in the bowl game are guys that are back. And we saw them rush for 236 yards against Oregon State without Audric Estime. We saw them pass in the game. We saw Steve Angeli just rip apart the Oregon State defense. He went 15 of 19 for 232 yards, 3 touchdowns, averaged 12.2 yards per play. As an offense in the game, Notre Dame had 468 yards of offense, averaged 7.0 yards per play against Oregon State in a 48-8 win. And honestly, probably could have hung a couple more on them if they really wanted to put them on them in the second half, which they chose not to do. So we've seen it play a game, but you can't put too much on a bowl game, and one game doesn't define you because every team can have a good game. The question is going to be, can this group go out and play at a high level week after week after week? And that is absolutely a question mark, because what we saw from last year's group was a group that had an All-American in Joe Alt, top 5 draft pick. It had a second-round draft pick, a right tackle. They had a returning starter, multi-year starter at center in Zeke Correll. But the offensive line went out and struggled for chunks of the season. Had some really good games at times, but as a whole struggled. So you could say, well, hey, I watched this offensive line against Ohio State, and they were very good, and so I think they're going to be very good. Well, yeah, that's fine, and you might have felt the same way if you watched them against Stanford. But if you watch the offensive line against Clemson, if you watched them against Duke, against Louisville, and especially if you watch them against Duke, you're going to come away thinking this line's not very good. And that type of up and down is something that played that group. And then now you have to replace them, and you have to get better. That's the thing. The offensive line has to be better this season than it was a year ago. You have to be better despite not having Joe Alt, despite not having Blake Fisher, and despite not having Zeke Correll. You have to go out this season and be better. That's a very tall task, but that's the expectation. That's what's needed from this offensive line. And for Joe Rudolph, it's like, hey, look, I know you lost some guys, but you're going into year 2. It's a very similar situation. Like the O-lines and the D-lines are very similar, but like a year apart. And when you look at like 2022, Al Washington's first year, caught a lot of shrapnel for how the season went, for how the defensive line played, and for good reason. The defensive line didn't play well, especially to the talent level. You walk into a situation, you inherit Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola and Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Justin Adamiola and the players that they had in 2022 and Jacob Lacey, and you look at it and say, boy, this team should have a pretty darn good defensive line. Well, they were disappointing. They underachieved. They were inconsistent. They looked great at times against certain opponents, including some good opponents. Like Clemson. They looked great against Clemson and then looked really bad at other times. Sound familiar? Sounds a lot like the offensive line last year with Joe Rudolph. You walk in your first year on the job. You've got an All-American at left tackle, future first-round pick. You've got a guy with loads of talent at right tackle. You've got veteran coming back at center that was a guy that Coach Easton loved. You've got 2 new guards, not the greatest talents, certainly no experience, but some big guys that were juniors in college. And then you had some very talented young depth. And the question was, okay, well, you should be pretty good. And they weren't. They were at times, but they weren't consistently a good offensive line. Well, then you fast forward a year later, and Al Washington's taken over the D-line. They lose Isaiah Foskey. They lose Jason Adamiola. They lose Justin Adamiola. They get a transfer from Ohio State who didn't really do a whole lot during his career. And there's some good players there, but, who are going to be the dudes? You've got some guys that have been in rotation because who are going to be the dudes? They go out in year 2 without their 2 most productive players, and they're way better as a unit. And so now you got to hope that, and so what has that done with the narrative about Al Washington? Before, he just got hammered for everything. You can't coach, you can't recruit, you can't do any of these things. Now you're looking at it saying, well, we think he's a pretty good developer, but now let's talk about the recruiting. And with Joe Rudolph, it's kind of the opposite. It's, well, can he develop the offensive line in Notre Dame? We know he can recruit. He's done a great job of that, but can he develop this offensive line? And so now you're in a situation where Joe Rudolph needs to show in year 2 the kind of chops that Al Washington showed in year 2, where even though you lost some dudes, you're going to go out there and still have an even better line than what you had the year before. I mean, think about that. Notre Dame had a much better defensive line in 2023 with no Isaiah Foskey, no Jason Adamiola, no Justin Adamiola than they did with those guys. Now, I'm not saying it was because of those guys. What I'm saying is, obviously, your D-line coach did a much better job of building that up. And so he gets a lot of credit for that, deservedly so. Now you look at the offensive line. Now they're going into year 2 under Joe Rudolph, and you have to ask yourself, can he do the same thing? And we know that Joe Rudolph did a good job of building some lines at Wisconsin, but they tended to be veteran lines. And so when you look at this group, you got to ask yourself, can they get better this year without Joe Alt, without Blake Fisher, and without Zeke Correll? And even more importantly, can they get a lot better protecting the quarterback without your 2 starting tackles? Because as Marcus Freeman made very clear to us in our press conference, and it's something that we've talked about, big problem the offensive line had last year was they weren't good at protecting the quarterback, especially in some big moments. I mean, you think about how bad Sam Hartman got harassed against Duke and harassed against Louisville, and just some of those games where it's like he just didn't have the time he needed to go out there and be effective early on against NC State. The offensive line wasn't good at protecting the quarterback last year. Well, you've got to be better this year. And I know you've got a more mobile quarterback, but you can't rely on Riley Leonard to have to evade the kind of pressure that Sam Hartman dealt with last year, because there's times where Sam Hartman got hit. I don't care who your quarterback is. The way that pressure came right up the middle as quickly as it did, you're not getting out of that. I don't care if you're Riley Leonard, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Michael Vick, John Elway, don't care. You're getting sacked right there. And they can't be that way. They can't allow that to happen this year. They're going to have to give the quarterback time to throw the football. They're going to have to be more physically dominant in the run game without those studs. And so if they do improve, then we'll be able to look back and say, okay, Joe Rudolph was the right hire by Marcus Freeman. He got the job done. He went out there and took this young ball of clay line and turned it into something really good. And they need that. I mean, they need that. Because when you look at the offensive line, it's a very unique situation. And you don't often see this at Notre Dame. It's a group of players that when you look at it, you say, okay, well, Pat Coogan has 13 career starts. Rocco Spindler has 10 career starts. Ashton Craig has 3. That's 26. You got 3 more from Billy Schrout. That's 29. You've got 3 offensive line starts from Tosh Baker. That's 32. And then you got Jagasol has his 1. That's 33. That's not a lot. I mean, when you look at going into last season, Joe Alt had started, let's see here, he had started 13. He had started 20 straight games. Blake Fisher and Joe Alt ended their careers with over 50 career starts between the 2 of them. This line as a whole has 33 career starts. And here's the thing. 3 of the guys that have starts, including the 2 guys with the most starts on the roster, are right now going to go into fall camp playing the same position. So you're either going to have 13 fewer starts in your starting offensive line or 10, depending on who starts. So if Rocco Spindler starts, then you're going to have 20 career starts entering the season. If Pat Coogan starts, then you're only going to have 23 career starts in your starting lineup entering the season. That's not a lot. It is a very inexperienced offensive line. Now, the good news is that, as we said, there's some time they spent together. Obviously, Ashton Craig and Billy Schrout played with Pat Coogan the last 3 games of the season. We saw Charles Jagasol and Tosh Baker, handle business in the bowl game. But it's still a very young group. And how are they going to be on a week-to-week basis? We don't know that. We don't know that. And so when you look at it and you say, okay, they're going to have to get better with that amount of experience, that seems unlikely. You just don't see a team go from 23 career starts in your starting line or 20 career starts in your offensive line, and by the end of the year, it's a dominant offensive line. You just don't see that very often. You just don't. Having said that, I do feel confident. Well, why? Okay, well, there's 2 explanations for why I could feel confident. One, pure homerism. I mean, it's just this. It's the summer. We're all excited. Pure homerism. Well, I'm pretty confident that's not it. So then, why am I optimistic? Well, because here's the thing. They're young. They're an inexperienced group, but you know what? They're also a very talented group, and it's a very deep group. And the reality is, there's only one person to blame if they're struggling in a position and nothing gets done about it, and it's Joe Rudolph. because when you look at the offensive line coming back and you say, yes, it's inexperienced, but you're very talented, you're pretty big, and you're deep. So if you struggle at left guard again, like you did last year, you have plenty of options. You're going to have the guy that started at the other spot last year. So if Pat Coogan struggles, you've got Rocco. If Rocco starts and struggles, you've got Pat. You also have a chance to go with a guy like Christopher Tarek, who I thought was a 330-plus pound kid who I thought had a very good spring, who's a guard. You could talk about Sullivan Absher moving inside and playing guard, which I think is his best position, and would love to see that. Sam Pendleton's getting work at center right now, but that's just to help build the depth there. They would have no problem moving Sam over to guard if that's where the need was. You talk about right tackle. If Tosh Baker's a starter and he doesn't perform well, you've got Emil Wagner. You've got Gerby Lambert. You've got Sullivan Absher, who's mostly played tackle in his career. If Emil starts and he doesn't play well, you've got Tosh Baker. You've got Gerby Lambert. You've got Sullivan Absher. And the only position where you don't really have a natural depth is at left tackle. And we'll talk more about that when we do our preview of the position. But the reality is, yes, it's a young group, but it's a group with loads of talent. You look at just the God-given ability of the current interior compared to what we saw most of last year. You had Rocco Spindler at right guard, Pat Coogan at left guard, and Zeke Correll at center. It's a big, good-sized group, tough kids, older kids. Rocco and Pat were in their third season in the program. Zeke Correll was a fifth-year senior, multi-year starter. You say, well, at least you'll give some toughness. And they battled. I don't, there were times they got their butts kicked, but they battled. But they just weren't good enough. I mean, they just weren't good enough. Right tackle Blake Fisher just didn't play up to his potential. So even with the experience that you had last year, they didn't play up to their expectations. The talent did not live up to the expectations at right tackle. But on the inside, outside of Rocco, I don't know that either of the other two guys were really high talent players. Well, that's a little bit different this year. Pat Coogan's a smart, try-hard kid, does everything you ask him to do. He's just not super talented. Rocco has more God-given ability. So coach Rocco up, coach Pat up. If Pat's the guy, then he's the guy. He's got to play better. But you've got to do more to get Rocco to push Pat to either A, make Pat better, or B, Rocco wins the job. You're going to be you're going to be better at left guard than you were last year, in my opinion. I don't see how, unless you're just a bad football coach, and I do not think that about Joe Rudolph at all. But that's the only way you're not better at left guard. Well, then right guard, you say, well, Billy Schrouth is a junior. Last year, Rocco and Pat were juniors. Boy, they started last year as true juniors, and they struggled. So what makes you think that Pat Coogan that Billy Schrouth is going to be any better than what those other two guys were when you talk about what they did coming into last season? Well, and the same thing is true at center at Ashton Craig. You're going from a guy that was a multi-year starter to a guy that played 3 games at the end of last year. And so what's the expectation that they're going to be better there? Well, here's my expectation. I'm going to give you some numbers, and we've talked about this on the show before. Going into last season as a true junior, meaning, with the program, so as like third-year player, Rocco Spindler had played 19 career snaps. Pat Coogan had played 3. So your 2 starting guards going into last season had played 22 career snaps. That's it. Well, now when you look at the left guard position and you talk about the battle for the starting left guard position, last year your starting left guard had 3 career snaps going into the season. Well, now you're talking about your left guard either is going to be a guy in Rocco Spindler that now has 578 career snaps, or a guy in Pat Coogan that has 772 career snaps. So you're going to be better there. But what about the direct comparison of Schrouth and Craig compared to those 2 juniors who struggled in their first year? Why? What's your argument, Driscoll, that Craig and Schrouth won't have the same thing? Well, here's the difference. I just mentioned that the 2 juniors last year had a combined a total of 19 and 3 career snaps for a combined total of 22. Ashton Craig comes into the season with 238 career snaps. That center. Billy Schrouth at right guard has 257 career snaps. So you have 2 guys that now have almost 500 career snaps going into the season compared to 2 guys last year that only had 22. That matters. So, yes, they're both true juniors. Both sets of guys were true juniors, but the difference now is the two true juniors now in Craig and Shrouth have way more experience. Again, 222 compared to almost 500 between the other two guys. Where's the other part of that? Look, they're a lot more talented. Look, I like Zeke Correll. I think Zeke Correll's a good quality football player. I hope he does really well at NC State. I have no ill will towards Zeke Correll. But he's also an undersized guy that had dealt with a lot of injuries, and he just wasn't the same kind of athlete and didn't have quite the power profile that you really needed. Well, Ashton Craig's a lot less experienced than Zeke was, who has over 1,000 career snaps, but Ashton's a more athletic player right now, and Ashton showed an ability in his 3 games last year to move people that was more effective than what we saw from Zeke coming into that game. And I know that Zeke brought a lot of value to the table. This is not a bash Zeke Correll moment. I love Zeke. But the reality is you are going to have a more physically gifted player at the position. Now, on the offensive line, that doesn't mean a hill of beans if you don't play with toughness, if you don't play with smarts, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't, hey, look, if they do this, we handle this. I mean, that's the thing about Zeke is Zeke didn't always win the battles, but you always felt like Zeke knew what he was doing. And he always could get people lined up. Well, now you've got a center who doesn't necessarily have that ability. You have a center that is still young, that is learning a lot of things, but you have to balance it, right? You don't have the experience that you had last year, but you've got better size and you've got more athleticism and a little bit more power. Now, Zeke and Ashton are listed about the same weight, but I've seen them standing next to each other. Ashton Craig is a bigger body than what Zeke Correll is. He just is. And now he goes into another season. So there's more talent there. When you look at the duo of Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, 2 bigger kids, Rocco's got some power. Pat's a try-hard kid, but there's not a lot of athleticism there. I don't think Rocco Spindler would come in here and be like, you're nuts. I'm the best athlete on the planet. No, he's gotten better. He's worked hard to get his feet better, and they were better in the spring than they were in last fall. But he's never going to be a guy that confuses you for, Quentin Nelson from a foot quickness standpoint. What Rocco is a powerful player that can move people. The question now is, can Rocco get to his full potential and be a guy that's good enough to go out there and beat out Pat Coogan? And here's another thing too, is will Joe Rudolph allow that to happen? That's going to be another question that we're going to have to see answered. But if Rocco beats out Pat Coogan, then you're going to be more talented at left guard than you were last year at right guard. On the flip side, at right guard, as much as I like Rocco, he's not as talented as Billy Shrouth. He's not. And Rocco going into his junior season last year was less athletic and had 19 career snaps. Billy Shrouth goes into his junior season not as big as Rocco, but still a 310-pound kid, maybe 310 to 312-pound kid, much more athletic kid, but he has 257 career snaps. And we have film of him showing he can be that guy. So the talent level's improved. So there's this trade-off of you're less experienced at center and your overall experience is less inside because you lost Zeke Correll. But overall, you have more experience on your offensive line at 3 spots than you did last year because, as I said, Pat Coogan had 3 career snaps going into last season. Ashton Craig and Billy Shrouth both have 3 career starts in their Notre Dame tenure. So they're way ahead from an experience standpoint. They're ahead from a talent standpoint. And I think style of play standpoint, last year, 2 of your 3 starters on your interior of your offensive line were being positioned tough kids in Zeke and Pat Coogan. Now you're going to have a much more athletic group, especially since Rocco and Pat Coogan are playing the same position as of right now. So that barring injury, your 2 guys that don't move as great are going to be battling for 1 spot. You're going to be more athletic. You're going to have better movers at center and one of the guard spots, because although I don't think Billy Shrouth necessarily moves people as well as Rocco did when Rocco's feet were right, Billy can move people, and he can certainly move people better than what Pat Coogan could. So now you're as a group, you're going to be better. And if Rocco can win that starting left guard job, then all of a sudden you've got a chance to be really, really good. But that's going to require Joe Rudolph to really coach his butt off. He did not do a very good job last year with an inexperienced offensive line. It was year 1 for him. And you're hoping that what you see from him is similar to what we saw from Al Washington, where Coach Washington took those guys that were going into year 2 of their tenures, and they made big jumps. They knew him. They knew what he wanted from them. There was no more, well, Mike Elson did it this way and Mike Elson did it that way. That was gone. And that's no disrespect to Mike Elson. When you have a good position coach, your players are going to naturally be like, but hey, that guy was really good, and I want to listen to things he's telling me to do, and you're telling me something different. Well, the same thing was true last year. The veteran players were, hey, well, Coach Eastan did it this way, and Coach Eastan did it that way, and that's understandable because Coach Eastan was a tremendous football, still is if he wanted to be, but Coach Eastan is a tremendous offensive line coach and incredibly knowledgeable guy. Of course you're going to want to listen to him. What's a lot harder for a guy like Zeke Correll, who's a veteran, or some of these other veterans to come in and say, well, hey, this new guy's coming in trying to say some things to me. Well, now you go into 2022 or 2024, and Billy Schrauth has been coached for 2 of his 3 years in college by Joe Rudolph. The same thing is true for Emil Wagner. The same thing is true for Ashton Craig. Charles Jagasaw has only been coached by Joe Rudolph. So I think you're going to see a similar jump in buy-in now that you're in year 2, now that you've been able to feel that coach out, now that you've been able to see like, well, yeah, when I did what he told me to do, it worked. And you hope to see that same jump that you saw from the defensive line the year before. Because if this team is going to get to that point, that's what they're going to need to be. He's going to have to do a great job with the tackles. You're going to have inexperienced tackles. Like, your tackles are somewhat similar to where your guards were last year. More playing time, but not a ton. I mean, obviously we saw Charles Jagasaw get a start last season, but let's be honest, Charles Jagasaw only played a lot in one game. He only has 66 career snaps. And if, Tosh Baker's played more, but Tosh doesn't have a ton of career snaps. He only played 118 snaps last season. And when you look at him for his career, Tosh only has 327 career snaps in 4 years. He played 7 snaps in 2020, 186 in 2021, only 16 in 2022, and only 118 last year. So he's not a very experienced guy. And then if Emil Wagner wins that starting job, Emil only has 52 career snaps. The most snaps he's ever played in a game was 12 against Tennessee State. So you're going to have to really do a great job to get this group playing at a high level and to their potential. Now, when I say to their potential, I'm not saying you have to get Charles Jagasaw as a sophomore to play like he should when he's a senior. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, too, is you got to get as close as you can to their full potential for where they are right now. The best version of sophomore version of Charles Jagasaw. The best version of junior year Billy Schrauth, junior year Emil Wagner, junior year Ashton Craig, senior Rocco Spindler, sophomore at Sullivan Absher, sophomore Sam Pendleton, freshman Gerby Lambert. That's the task that's in front of Joe Rudolph. And if he can do the job well, then this team has a chance to be really good. If he can't, then Notre Dame's going to struggle to reach their full potential. That's the reality, because you can't say we're a line-driven team and not have a guy that's a great coach and recruiter and developer on your staff at either of those positions. And that's kind of the opposite of what the concern is with Al Washington. It's like, okay, the development has been pretty good so far for what we've seen, and I'll talk about some questions in that regard, but the recruiting part has to pick it up. Well, with Coach Rudolph, it's okay. You had your sort of first year, get your feet wet thing. Now you have to go show us that you can be an elite developer at a place like Notre Dame. Because if you can't, I don't care how good your recruiting is. You have to be a developer first and a recruiter second. You have to be very good at both of them, but the development part has to come first. And that's what Coach Rudolph's going to have to show. And I have a level of confidence that he will. If I'm being honest, I have a level of confidence that he will. So, and what does that look like? That's the final piece is what will it look like for Joe Rudolph to go out there and coach this offensive line well? Well, for one, when you look at Joe Rudolph, and you're talking about a guy that in year 1, it was verbalized publicly by the offensive coordinator and the head coach that the offensive coordinator, who was going into his first year as a full-time offensive coordinator where he was running the show, which was not the case during his tenure at West Virginia, was going to rely a lot more on guys like Joe Rudolph, who was an offensive coordinator at Pitt and Wisconsin. And so not only are you trying to incorporate, build yourself up as a first-year coach, you're now having to be a little bit more involved in some of the decision-making. What direction are we going to take the run game? What are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? Well, now Jared Parker's gone, and you've got Mike Denbrock is here. Mike Denbrock's going to run what Mike Denbrock wants to run. This offense is going to be geared towards what Mike Denbrock believes in. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't take input from Joe Rudolph. He'd be silly not to take some feedback from your position coaches, who are also good coaches. But the point is, there's not as much responsibility on Joe Rudolph to be that shoulder, that rock type of situation for Jared Parker, especially in his first season at Notre Dame. Now, Joe Rudolph can just say, hey, man, go coach the O-line. That's it. That's all I need you to do. Be the best dang offensive line coach you can be. And I think that's going to be good for Coach Rudolph. And as an offensive line coach, you are obviously going to have your input on what you're doing. This isn't just shut your mouth and go coach your line. It's just more about, you don't need him thinking about other things. You don't need him giving advice to your OC or challenging him to do this or whatever. It's like, dude, just coach the O-line. I think that's going to help him and make him a lot better. And it's going to also allow him to focus more time on the players from a development standpoint, because you do have youth. You are going to need to make sure that you're spending that time. And so what is it going to look like if Joe Rudolph does a better job? Well, number one, big picture, the pass protection is going to get a lot better. And we talked about that earlier. That's going to get a lot better. And you're going to give up some pressures, but here's the difference. Last year, when they would get beat on the O-line, they got whooped. It was just flat out dudes running right by them on the outside. You're talking about guys just coming right up the middle, borderline untouched. And there's like nothing Sam Hartman can do about it. Just free runs at the quarterback, or guys just getting pushed right into the quarterback. Well, look, if you're a tackle and you get beat outside, so if Charles Jagasaw gets beat around the edge, just doesn't get out of a stance quick enough, all right, that's fine. But you've got to just still work to get out there and just get hands-on, right? That's the thing, is get hands-on to where you've got actually 4 quarterbacks now that, and Sam Hartman could have done this too if given the opportunity, but that's not what was happening a lot of times. Where, okay, yeah, you got beat around the edge, but you recovered, you got hands-on, you rode the guy outside, so now I can step into the pocket, right? Or, hey, guy beat you up in the A-gap, but you do a great job of working your feet, anchoring to where now as the quarterback, I can spin out or I can slide step, kind of slide step, reset my feet and throw because you secured that guy and rode him out. You're gonna have snaps like that, but you need to be physical and have hands-on and limit those free runs at the quarterback and multiple guys hitting Sam Hartman at the same time. That's the other thing that hurt Sam Hartman last year is there'd be times it was like there's nowhere for him to go. 2 guys came up the middle and 1 guy came on the outside, and you're just like, where's he supposed to go? I don't care if it's Riley Leonard. I don't care if it's Michael Vick. I don't care if it's John Elway at quarterback. That's going to be a sack. And those things have to get eliminated. You have to be more consistent in that regard. That includes assignment correctness. This was a problem that plagued the offensive line throughout the year. Assignment correct, not being assignment correct. There would just be too many snaps where just run game and pass game where somebody clearly blew something, because I'm pretty sure that 3 technique was not unblocked on this particular play. Now, we'll see some unblocked guys this year, but it's going to be by design because they're doing read concepts. But last year, that wasn't the case. They're just running straight inside zone or running duo, and the guy just comes free and blows up your running back. I mean, and if you didn't have a guy like Audric Estime last year, you'd have been in even more trouble because Audric was able to, in a lot of those instances, make guys miss. And I'm trying to remember who, I think it might have been Central Michigan. There was a game early where Audric got hit like 5 or 6 yards in the backfield, and he ends up making this great run for like -1. And you're just like, dude, that's a huge play because you went from 2nd and 16 to 2nd and 11. That's a much better scenario to be in. And this year, you're not going to have a guy like Audric. You're going to have faster, more explosive backs, which means if you can get a body on a body and just do your job, and everybody just gets a body on a body and just with some level of physicality, these 2 running backs they have now, the quarterback they have now, those guys are going to turn those plays into big gains. There were so many plays last year where Audric just kind of had to do hero ball stuff. And you're not going to need your guys to do that as often this year. If this line can be more assignment correct. Along with being more assignment correct, What we need to see from Joe Rudolph in year 2 is the line last year. They did a lot of, I'm trying to think of the way to explain this. The way that they would block, it was very segmented. And here's what I mean by that. So they would, come off and step and bring their hands and strike, but then stop their feet. Or they would kind of step, then bring their hands, and in either instance, you're losing power. So if you're not stepping and then driving your hands and bringing your hips through contact and drive your feet through contact, then you're going to hit and stalemate. Well, that's not great for an inside zone. You can do that if you're pinning and pulling. And I think that was sort of an issue for Coach Rudolph because he is such a heavy pin and pull guy from his past that some of their duo and inside zone stuff wasn't effective because they were more focused on those, just, hey, you down block, you get in that guy's way, you make sure he doesn't get outside the gap to you. Well, in an inside zone and in duo especially, you need to get movement. Well, you can't get movement when you stop moving. I mean, look, I'm not a rocket scientist, y'all. I was a history major, right? I was a football coach. But I'm pretty sure that if you were to ask someone who teaches physics or no physics, that if something stops moving, it is then not going to be able to move that object any further than it did beyond the initial contact, right? So you got to move your feet beyond point of contact. That's imperative in duo and inside zone because the whole point of duo, what makes it different from inside zone, here's the biggest difference between inside zone and duo philosophically. Inside zone is meant to be double teams working to the second level. So if I'm a center and I'm working with my left guard and we're running inside zone and he's coming with me, we are trying to get movement on that first level defender to then one of us is going to come off and block that second level defender. In duo, a lot of times they'll treat that play side inside backer as like, well, the running back's got to handle that guy because duo is meant to dominate that double team. And ideally, if you can drive that double team into that guy, sure, that's great. But it's more the running back is responsible for the second level more than you see in inside zone. Both of them, however, have a lot of similarities when it comes to how you are teaching them how to block from a technical standpoint. There's a lot of similarities, in my opinion, between duo and zone philosophically. And the big one being movement, and driving vertical runs, not lateral outside zone, fast swipe type runs, but vertical power moves. You can't do that when you're not moving your feet and you're not striking. Well, fortunately, what we saw this spring was more of that. We saw the offensive line move really. You could tell there was a concerted effort. Number one, we could see it in practice. Number two, that it then translated to both scrimmages. Now, the lines didn't play great in either game. But if you go back and watch the blue gold game, there were a lot fewer instances where the offensive line would strike and stop their feet. You were striking and then power moving through it. Now, at times they would stop, then pick up their feet. That's okay. That's better. Now, the next step is going to be, really driving your feet through contact. But it can't be like a really fast chop because then you lose your base. It's like that power drive. And so we did see improvement there. And that's has to continue in the fall. Those are areas you're going to see improvement because I'm just telling y'all right now, if this offensive line can do two things, be assignment correct and get a push, they don't have to be dominant. They don't. I'm telling y'all right now, go watch when Travis Etienne was balling at Clemson. They weren't dominant offensive lines, but his first 2 years there, 18 and 19, but especially 18, it was more about, hey, they'd get a body on a body and just work their feet and then just get decent movement and then let Travis do all the damage. And that's what this line has to be with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Look, you don't have to open up these huge gaping holes. These guys are explosive, dynamic playmakers. The difference between these two kids and a guy like Josh Adams, for example, who had a heck of a year in 2017. Love Josh Adams. But the difference is Josh kind of needed that hole to be open, and then he was going to exploit it. He was an explosive vertical player. Well, these two kids are more about, hey, like, I just need you to get a body on a body. I can make somebody miss on the second level. I just need you guys to make sure that there's a body on a body in that first line, and then you just give me a crease. And you give me a crease, I'm going to go with it because I got explosiveness. I mean, we saw that from both of those guys last year. linebacker thinks, hey, I'm stepping in this hole to block these two guys, and then the two young kids would make some crazy cut. Audric would make some crazy cut and make a miss. You got very talented backs. So if you can keep a body on a body and play with more physicality than they did last year, not toughness, because there was a couple times I questioned their toughness, but overall it wasn't so much a toughness problem from the offensive line, it was a physicality problem. And that's not to me, and here's the difference. Toughness is a mindset. Physicality to me is more of a style. And you can't be physical if you don't play a certain way. I mean, if you're a boxer and you're trying to get an uppercut and you just stand there flat-footed, knees locked, and try to uppercut a guy, you're not going to be as powerful as when you get that coil, you get that the back foot, you come up with that. You're using your whole body to get power into that, right? Well, it's pick any sport. If you're a baseball player, I don't care how strong your hands are. If you stand there and lock your ankles and lock your knees and just try to swing with all arm, you're not going to hit that ball very far. You need to have a base, right? You need to have that base. Great hitters get that trigger. They get that back foot. They drive off their back foot. They bring their hips through, and then their hands come through with great speed and power. Blocking is the same way. It can't just be, hey, you come off and you just, hit a guy and you're so powerful that he goes flying. That doesn't happen in college. When you look at Quentin Nelson's big blocks in the run game, they weren't blocks where he just hit a guy and the guy went flying. He'd hit a guy, knock the guy back, and then drive his feet and destroy the guy. The only time we saw Quentin have those just come off and crush a guy was in pass pro. It's a different animal. Guy'd come off a blitz. You think of that edge rush he had against Georgia where he came off and just blasted him, right? That doesn't happen in the run game. It's power and then move, right? Come off, strike him, and then drive through contact. That's where you've got to be. They showed improvement this spring. That's got to continue, because when you look at the combination of size and athleticism in certain spots of this line, there's some guys that if they play with good technique are going to be movers. Billy Shrouth, if he plays with good technique, is going to be a mover. Charles Jagasaw, when he plays with good technique, is a mover. Ashton Craig can be a mover when he plays with good technique. And now those guys all have an extra year under their belts from a strength program. And that's something else to consider last year too. That offensive line didn't have a full-time strength coach. And this is not meant to be a shot at Fred Hale, who I think filled in admirably. But Fred Hale did not go into 2023 thinking, I'm going to have to be the primary strength conditioning coach. He was still expected to be, learning under Coach Bayless, and he held his own. And clearly the people at Notre Dame have a great deal of respect for Fred Hale, for not only being a team player, but also for the job he did, because he still works at Notre Dame. He still works with Coach Lando. So clearly there's some respect there, but he wasn't ready to be Matt Bayless. And that's part of it too. So now you go into a year where you've got to full-time strength coach. You're now got guys that were sophomores and are now going to their junior years. And for a lot of these guys, actually for all of these guys, except for Tosh Baker's the only kid on the roster that I'm trying to think of this. He's the only kid on the roster that is going into the 2024 season with having played for the same coach for more than a year. Think about that. Rocco Spindler and Billy Shrouth, or Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan, who are seniors. As freshmen, they played for Jeff Quinn. As sophomores, they played for Harry Hiestand. As juniors, they played for Joe Rudolph. Now, I don't care who you think is the best or who, it doesn't matter. It's continuity is key. Whoever your coach is, you need to know what his expectations are and what he asks of you. Jeff Quinn is a very different coach from Harry Hiestand, and Harry Hiestand is a very different coach from Joe Rudolph. Not better, not worse, just different. Now, I think that there's levels to how good they are, but that's not the point. Now you're going to a situation where they now know the coach better and the coach knows them better. And so you hope that they'll kind of work on those areas where they need to improve. Use your hands better. The offensive line last year did not play real physical with their hands. When the offensive line in 22 started getting really good, it's when they were doing two things better. And this is what Harry Hiestand worked on every single day. I mean, every single day, you'd see Coach Hiestand with his offensive linemen working on driving their feet, or keeping their base, driving their feet, and being powerful with their hands. Every day they'd work on that. Every single day. Well, last year they didn't do either of those things very well. I do believe they're working on those things now, and we saw improvement in the spring. Now we need to see the other jump in the fall. Because at the end of the day, folks, they need to be good, not just for some theoretical well, you're Notre Dame. It's like the whole thing I did yesterday on year 3 success. Well, it's not just about, well, Marcus Freeman's got to do well in year 3 because Lou Holtz did, and Dan Devine did, and Frank Leahy did, and Eric Parsegian did, and Newt Rockney did. It's nothing to do with it. That's cool to talk about, but it's more so because of the reasons why year 3 is important, because of what it shows. So when you look at this group, it's not just, okay, theoretically they have to play better because they're Notre Dame. Oh, sure, I guess. But the practical part is, look at the teams they play. I mean, in 2021, you had a terrible offensive line. One of the worst Notre Dame's had in a very long time. Worse than 2016, because the 2016 offensive line was pretty solid. They just had right guard was a problem, but the rest of their line was pretty good. You got to go back to 2007 to have a worse line than what Notre Dame had in 2021. But they were still able to go 11-1. Why? Because they didn't play very good teams. They definitely didn't play very many teams with good offense, good defensive lines. Well, you look at this year and you think about what are the biggest games that Notre Dame's got to play this year. It's Texas A&M, it's Louisville, it's Florida State, and it's USC. All 4 of those teams should have pretty good defensive lines this year. Now, USC is a unique situation because they've got some talent, but they weren't very good in the past. But they've changed things. They've now got DeAnton Lynn as their D coordinator. They got Eric Henderson as their D line coach. I expect them to be a lot better, especially by the time we get to game 12. Texas A&M is going to have a very talented defensive line. I don't think it's quite what people make it out to be, but it's very good. And if your offensive line's not being physical, not playing with good technique, not being assignment correct, they will work you. They will work you. And when you look at Louisville, same thing. They worked Notre Dame last year, and they pretty much have everybody of importance coming back. Then you look at Florida State. They lost a lot of guys, but they got a lot of guys coming in. They're going to have they got Marvin Jones coming in from Georgia. They have the Pace kid that came back from last year. They got a transfer in from Miami 2 years ago, who I believe got ruled ineligible right before the season, or maybe got hurt. I forget why, but they had a big 330-pound kid that was supposed to be a very good player for them last year, got hurt or didn't play. I forget the reason why, but he ended up not playing last year. Well, he's back now too. So I fully expect this Florida State defensive line to still be very, very good. Will it be as good as – is there anybody that's going to be as good as Jared Verse? Maybe not, but it's still going to be pretty good. And so you're going to have to be prepared for them. And as I said, USC is going to be pretty good. So here we go. 4 biggest games are going to have front sevens that can give you problems. So if you don't play your game, it could be similar to Duke last year. It could be similar to Louisville last year. It could be similar to Clemson last year. Because with the exception of Ohio State and NC State, when this – and NC State's kind of at times you were good, at times you were not very good at all. But they were very good against Ohio State. Outside of the Ohio State game, they kind of got their butts kicked in all the team against the better defenses that they played last year. Clemson kicked their butt. By freshmen at Clemson kicked their butt. You look at the Louisville game, they got their butts kicked. The Duke game, they got their butts kicked. That's got to change. And if Notre Dame's going to be the team they're capable of, that unit's got to play well in those big games. So it's not just theoretically because you're Notre Dame. It's practically speaking, looking at this schedule. If you want to win those big games, your line's going to have to play well. And it's going to be true when you get to the postseason, when you have to play Georgia, when you have to play Bama, when you have to play Ohio State or Texas or Oregon. If Michigan's in the playoff again, it's because they're better than I expect. They're going to have a really, really good defensive line. And when people talk about the best interior defensive tackles and best interior line in college football, they don't talk about Notre Dame, although I think they should talk about Notre Dame a whole lot more. They talk about Michigan. So if you play them again, it's going to be the same deal. If you play Penn State in the postseason, if you play Ole Miss in the postseason, all those teams, very good defensive lines. And Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared for that if the offensive line is going to thrive. So the talent's there. The potential's there. Now we need to see if Joe Rudolph can develop it. That's going to be the key. Can Joe Rudolph develop it and get the most out of this line? I expect him to. I actually have high expectations for this line. I don't know that they're going to look like world beaters in week 1, and they may look like world beaters in week 1, and then the next week against Northern Illinois not play very well. There's going to be a little bit of that up and down early in the season. So if you're someone who, you're not a big Joe Rudolph fan, don't assume that the first 3 or 4 games is just what they're going to be. It's really about the evolution throughout the season. They've got to play well enough in the opener to get through that game with a W, and then you've got 3 games to kind of get right, and then you've got your next big test against Louisville. And here's where I love the schedule. Then you play Louisville, and after Louisville, you've got a stretch of games where you're not playing a lot of really good teams or a lot of really good defenses. You've got Stanford after that. You've got Georgia Tech after that. You've got Navy after that before you have to go play Florida State. And then after Florida State, you got to play Virginia Tech, Virginia, and then Army and before you play USC. So there's not that back-to-back, or actually it'd be 3 back-to-backs, back-to-back that they had last year with Ohio State, Duke, and Louisville. I mean, you could argue, and I would argue that over the course of an entire season, the 3 best defensive lines in Notre Dame faced last year was Ohio State, Duke, and Louisville. Now, Clemson played really well in that game, but they were very young, and they had their fair share of ups and downs. Very talented, but young. The 3 best D-lines they faced in 2023 were Ohio State, Duke, and Louisville in back-to-back-to-back games. They don't have to deal with that this year. There isn't that same 3 games in a row that you have to handle. And so I think they'll be better positioned to do that. And if they can play well and do the things I talked about, this could be a fun year for them. I do want to we have a super chat before we move on to the next part. I'm going to bring that up because it's relevant to this conversation. Beefeater ND08 with a super chat. Thank you very much, my man. Bryan, can you speak to any changes in chemistry in the O-line room with Alt and Fisher gone? I felt like there was tension there last year. I mean, I don't have evidence of it either, but I do think that there was a lack of buy-in in certain instances, and I don't want to put names on it because you had said Alton Fisher. I'm not necessarily saying it's Alton Fisher. I'm not saying who it was. I'm not saying it's Zeke Corral. I'm just saying I don't believe from some things that I was told during the season and after the season that there was 100% buy-in to what Joe Rudolph was doing. There was a lot of questioning Coach Rudolph, some of the decisions he made and the way he went about things because he wasn't Coach Easton. Well, I mean, that's natural. I'm just telling you guys, that's not negative towards the players. I mean, you want them to do a better job. You want them to have more buy-in. At times, there were some communication problems with the coaching staff to the players. I hope that that's got fixed. So some of the frustration was somewhat understandable, which is going to happen when you're first year of a position coach. It's just going to happen. It's not going to happen. It happens a lot. And that's got to get worked through. And it's very similar to what we heard in year 1 under Al Washington, where some of the older players that had been under with Mike Elston didn't have the same buy-in as maybe a younger guy did who didn't have that same experience with Coach Elston. So I don't think that should be dismissed by people, but I also don't think that should be used as an explanation. Well, if it wasn't for that, the line would have been better. There was other issues going on last year from a coaching standpoint that can't be blamed on chemistry issues because the guys weren't completely bought in. That's a part of it. But there were some things that I complained about with Al Washington in year 1 from a technical standpoint that in year 2 got better. Not that he listened to our show and said, oh, let's do what Driscoll says, but it's just more about there's a foundation being built and you've got to get things done a certain way. And when guys aren't bought in, they're not going to play to a certain level, but you're also kind of deprogramming certain things and building it back up. Well, he won't have to do any of that this year. The reprogramming has already happened. Now it's about, okay, now teach the right things in the right way that allows them to then carry it out on Saturday, and they're playing at their best in the biggest moments. That's going to be the key. And if they can do that, then I think this team's going to have a shot to have a very, very good offensive line. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. I want to thank you all so much for being with me for this. We're going to talk D-line next, so be ready for that. And then we'll jump into our buy, sell, hold. Hit that like, folks. Hit that subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review. And if you've not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you want to read the content we're doing at irishbreakdown.com, you can always subscribe to our newsletter, which goes out most mornings. You can get that in the description box below. You can get our IB store. You can get our message board, all that stuff. Everything is in the description box below. So definitely check that out so you can get everything that we got going on at Irish Breakdown. Before we move on, I did want to address this. John said, after a long 5-month battle with cancer, my dad passed away this morning. This is a big thank you to all the wonderful people who prayed for us. Love you, IB Nation. John, I'm sorry to hear about that, man. Just know that we love you and we're praying for you. And we're not going anywhere. So whenever you need to talk about it or to get away from it, let us know and we'll be there for you. Okay. And I'm sorry you're going through that, my man. And I hope your dad's at peace now, but definitely praying for you, buddy. And we're here for you. So whatever you need, just let us know, okay? And we'll be there with you. I want to get into part 2 of today's show, and we're going to talk about the defensive line and the Notre Dame defensive line and what their expectations are for 2024. And here's the reality of it is when you look at the Notre Dame defensive line, they were pretty good last year. And there's this expectation that they're going to be good again this year. And I have it. I'd be shocked if there's any kind of step back from the D-line. And partly because, I mean, just about everybody comes back. You lost 2 pretty good players at the end position in Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Nano Safa-Mensah. But other than that, everybody comes back. There was some concern about, would Gabriel Rubio be back? Well, he's going to be back. And I have to think that Gabriel's going to be back and be completely refocused and re-energized. And then him being out in the spring allowed Jason Onye and Donovan Heinisch and some younger players, Sean Sevillano, to get a lot of reps and develop and grow. And so you have to hope that this group is going to be pretty good. All your Vipers come back. All your defensive tackles come back. All your noses come back. And so the expectation should be same D coordinator, same position coach, that they keep things rolling. And that's the minimum of what they need to do this year is just keep things rolling. Like, look, if Notre Dame in 2024 simply repeats what they did in 2023, they're going to have one of the 5 to 8 best defensive lines in college football because, I mean, that's what they were last year. And it's good enough for them to have a top 10 defense, a borderline top 5 defense. But the question is going to be more about this. Does the defensive line have what it takes from a coaching standpoint and a player standpoint and a schematic standpoint to raise beyond what it was last year? Because if this team is going to meet the expectations of what this season is, right? Which is 11-1. So we talked about yesterday, 11-1 plus and a playoff berth +1, right? That's the standard. But if this team is going to achieve something beyond that, then the group we talked about earlier is going to have to play a big role, but also this group right here is going to have to play a big role. If Notre Dame is going to achieve beyond what the expectation is, which is a deep playoff run or a national championship, then the defensive line can't just do what it did last year. It needs to be better. It needs to be more dominant, more productive, and even better in big games. And if they don't improve, they're still going to be very good, and I won't have any complaints. But the reality is I just don't see this team being good enough to win it all. And that's going to be the big key. And that's the biggest question about this D-line is, can they get better? Can they be better and more productive than they were in 2024 or 23? That's going to be the big question. So what does it mean to get better? Well, to begin, you have to start at a position where you have the big questions of we don't know what it's going to be. Because last year you had pretty good production from your big end position, your defensive. Notre Dame calls it defensive end, nose, tackle, and then Viper. So when we say defensive end, we're talking about that big end, field end position. You lost 2 pretty good players. Javonte Jean-Baptiste exhausted his eligibility after a fine season for Notre Dame. I mean, one of the most pleasant surprises of the season last year was Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who we thought coming into the year could provide some pass rush production, and he did, but was a much better run defender than I thought he was going to be. I mean, just played beyond my expectations for him. 10-plus tackles for loss, 5 sacks. And the thing about Javonte was he was so clutch. I mean, he played well in their big games. He had big sacks or big stops and big moments. He was just a clutch player and was really fun to watch. And then one of the more underrated and underappreciated members of the defense last year was, in my opinion, Nano Safa-Mensah, who was a rotation player, which is what he should be, a good, important rotation player. But it's just one of those things where I talk about this all the time, or at least I have recently, where I say you can't take your 1 out and there's a big drop-off in number 2. You just can't do that because you're going to have a hard time being as good if that's the case. And when you look at last season, as good as Javonte Jean-Baptiste was, they didn't really miss a beat when Nana came into the game. Now, they were different players, and Nana was not, in my opinion, the edge rusher that Javonte Jean-Baptiste was last season, but Nana was a very effective run player for Notre Dame last season and did a lot of really good things when it came to defending the run. And he was a tough kid and also had some clutch moments. And so you had two kids that combined for 16, I think over 16, it was like 16 and a half tackles for loss and 8 sacks last season. That's very good production from the defensive end position. So the question now is, can you even get to that, what you were last year? That's the one position where there's a question mark about this D-line is, can they match what we saw last year? And not from a production and a play standpoint, because I think production matters. It's just not the only thing. And what I mean by that is you can play very well as a defensive end and not have a lot of production for a host of reasons, which we've broken down before. But the point is the production still needs to be there, but then the overall quality of play needs to also at least match what we had last season. And of course, that's going to put a lot on Al Washington because he did a very good job with last year's defensive line, but he's got a little bit of a different task this season. And the task is different. And it starts here with this group, which is you now have 3 completely different players. None of the guys playing defensive end right now were playing defensive end last year. RJ Oben was playing at Duke. Bryce Young was in high school. And Josh Burnham was playing Viper. So you got a brand new group of players. And how are they going to perform? It's up to Al Washington to get RJ Oben caught up to what they're asking him to do, to deprogram certain things and reprogram in a way that allows him to thrive in this defense. That's a big task. He did it with Javonte Jean-Baptiste last year, but that was a kid he had a previous relationship with. Can he have the same level of impact on RJ Oben with a guy that he doesn't know and a guy that he didn't coach or wasn't on the staff for multiple years like he was Javonte? That's a legitimate question. Can he help Josh Burnham, who's extremely talented, but maybe an inexperienced player, a guy that never really played defensive line until he got to Notre Dame? Can he do more to get him ready to go, to help him become a more impactful player? And my thing is, if you can't get a guy like Josh Burnham and Bryce Young, 2 NFL talents, to be good football players for you, along with RJ Oben, then maybe you're not the football coach we think you are. So I have confidence that Al Washington is going to get that, but it does need to be discussed, and it's going to be a completely different challenge than what it was last year. Last year it was a kid you knew that you had to get acclimated to your defense. This year, it's kid moving positions. It's a kid coming in from high school and a kid coming in from another team that played the game a very different way that you have to get prepared, and that's going to be a big task. The second big task in front of Al Washington, in my opinion, is, okay, the positions that are coming back, can you keep them hungry? Right? Last year, this defensive line came into the season with a lot to prove. They played poorly the year before. They caught a lot of flack. There's a lot of people that thought they were going to be a weak spot. We actually at IB thought they were going to be pretty good. They were better than we thought they were going to be, but we thought they had a chance to be pretty good last year. But now, last year, you were the hunters, right? Like, you were the guys that had that edge. Howard Cross is out there. He had a chip on his shoulder or something to prove. Riley Mills had something to prove moving inside. Jordan Botelho kind of had something to prove. You had a lot of these guys that had, Jason Onye trying to fight for playing time. Gabriel Rubio trying to make an impact really for the first time. He'd been a rotation guy, but really become a key member. You had a lot of hungry players, a lot of guys that were the hunters. Well, now the expectations are through the roof for you. You're the hunted now. You're the D line that every other offensive line that you're going to play is going to measure themselves against. Oh, shoot, if we can do well against Notre Dame and that big-time D-line, then, hey, we can do something. Or individually, I want to put that – I'm a guard or center. I want to have a game of me kicking Howard Cross and Riley Mills' butt to put on film to send to NFL teams, right? It's my money game. And you're going to look at this defensive line very different. And if y'all don't think players look at other teams like that, you're out of your minds. They do. That doesn't mean it's the primary thing, but it's one of those things that guys will use as fuel to get ready for a big game. Okay, I'm going against a stud. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to be at my best, and here's what being at my best is going to do for me. And that's where this defensive line is now. Are they going to be as hungry? Does Howard Cross, now he's had multiple years or had multiple years in the rotation, now becomes a starter, then becomes an All-American. Is he going to be as hungry as he was a year ago? Is Riley Mills going to be a guy that says, hey, I was good last year, but I need to be better. I need to be hungry to be better. Does Jordan Botelho, how does he look at his season last year? So that's the next big challenge for Al Washington, is building on success. I mean, we're talking about, Notre Dame having a football team or a defensive tackle unit that might have a chance to be, the best in the country, one of the best in the country. But are they going to have the same desire to go out and play with the same fire and chip on their shoulder that they did last year? It's a very fair question. And it's up to you as a position coach to get more out of them, right? What buttons can you push with Howard Cross this year and Riley Mills this year that maybe are a little bit different than they were last year? Because you don't want to push the same buttons, because you don't want the same thing from them. You want better. And that can be a very underappreciated, underrated task for any position coach, really, is when you have, like, I'll give an example. I've talked about, success I had at Duquesne with my receivers, but what's funny is the guy that was expected to be our best receiver was one of the toughest nuts to crack for me when I first got there, because he already had this expectation of how good he was. And when I would come in and say, hey, you need to do this different, you need to do this better, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I was already pretty good. I'm like, yeah, you're pretty good, but I'm going to make you better. Not every kid has that mentality. And I don't know Howard Cross or Riley Mills or Gabriel Rubio or Jason Onye or Junior Tilamaka or Jordan Botelho or Boubacar Traore or Josh Brown. I don't know any of these guys. So that's going to be a question. And that's a big responsibility for Al Washington, is to get those guys better, because you have the potential to have a truly elite interior defensive line. And you all have heard me say this a million times. As an offensive coach, if I get my butt kicked up the middle, I'm going to have a long day. There's only so many things you can do to have success as an offense if you're getting your butt kicked up the middle. There's just really not a lot you can do. It impacts everything. It impacts the quick game. It impacts play action. It impacts drop back. It impacts inside zone. It impacts outside zone. I mean, there's literally nothing that you can do as an offense outside of like sprint outs that are going to get you away from them. And even then, it's like, yeah, I mean, they can still chase and pursue, and if the ball doesn't come out right away. So if you're getting your butt kicked up the middle, there's just not a lot of answers you can do. And as good as this interior defensive line was last year, it can and should be better. And so when you look at that group and you think about their level of production, there's a jump there. I'm going to get to that a little more as a unit here moving forward, but they're a big reason for that. And then the other part, which this may be the most important task for Al Washington this offseason as you get ready for 2024, and that is you need to get a lot more from the Viper position. Now, when you look at the drop in production from the Viper position, it's way worse than it was the previous couple years. Part of that, if you're being honest and fair about it, is, well, there was a big jump in production from the tackles, and there was a big jump in production from the defensive end position. That's fair. But it did not take up all those pressures. It was not a situation where, yeah, okay, our D-line was great. I was still playing very well, but, I didn't have as much because of this. I mean, the reality is the Notre Dame defense, as good as it was last year, had 10 fewer tackles for loss than it did the previous year, and 7 fewer tackles for loss than what it had in 2021. And it had 15 fewer tackles for loss than what the defense had in 2020 in only 12 games. 2019, 92 tackles for loss. 2018, 78. 2017, 79. You have to go back to the 2016 season to find a year where Notre Dame had fewer tackles for loss in a season than what they had last season. That has to improve. I mean, you look at, Marcus Freeman's first year as a defensive coordinator. Notre Dame makes a big jump in production in the sack game. In 2020, Notre Dame had 31 sacks in only 12 games. In 2019, they were at 34 in 2018. And then you have to go back all the way to 2017 when they had a down year at 24. Well, in Marcus Freeman's first year as the defensive coordinator, Notre Dame jumps up and has 41 sacks, which I believe is a program record. Now, keep in mind that the team did not record sacks during Ross Browner and Willie Fry's tenure, and I'd be willing to bet you that team probably would own the record if they had it, but they didn't keep sacks back then. So, the record was 41. I think that was set in I think it was 96 or something like that. I'd have to go back and look specifically. But Marcus Freeman's first defense tied that. They had 41. And then in year one of Al Golden's tenure, they had 38. Well, last year they dropped all the way down to 31. Now, in a lot of ways, they were more disruptive than they were the previous year as a defensive line. But the production didn't, the big plays did not always happen. And that's something that's going to have to get better. Sorry about that. So we're having some storms today, and so Rita's a little scared. And so I have a bed for her beside my desk, and she was under the covers this whole time. And so she got up and walked around, and then she came back up. And so she has this funny thing. She loves laying under blankets, especially when she's scared. And so what she'll do is she'll jump on her little bed and she'll claw at it until I grab a blanket. As soon as I grab a blanket, she will curl up, lay down, and I get to put the blanket on top of her. So she was doing that, and it was getting a little bit loud, so I had to stop it and do that real quick. So my apologies. So we'll get back on track here. So when we talk about the defensive line, the Viper position has to get better. A big part of the drop was because that position did not produce nearly what it needs to be. And I've seen a lot of excuses for it. Well, they dropped them in coverage a lot more. No, they didn't. Well, they did this. They did a lot. No, they didn't. I went back and compared the numbers of the number of times they dropped into coverage, the number of times they played the run, and they actually dropped into coverage fewer times than they did. I think it was in 22 or 21. And there was not a big jump in opportunities. It was you just didn't finish. You didn't make plays. And they're going to have to get better. The Viper position has to get a lot better. Because as a whole, one of the areas where this defensive line needs to get better is with the pass rush. They were not a great pass rushing team last year. And what I mean by that is at times they were very good. But to be a great pass rushing team, you can't just be great at times. You need to be consistently really good, and you have to be there in the big moments in the big games. And they weren't. When they needed big plays last year, there were times when the pass rush fell short. Now, we've talked about that. We don't need to rehash those again. But that's just the reality. They're going to have to be more effective in the pass rush. And there's a lot of levels to it. I think there needs to be more wins at the snap, especially at Viper. There were some, if we're being honest, some pressures last year that were coverage related. There was a lot of pressures last year that were required by the blitz. Notre Dame is still going to do that. They're still going to pressure a lot. They're still going to bring blitzes, and that's all fine and dandy. But to me, if the defensive line can get better, that's going to make those blitzes even more effective. And they have to have more wins at the point of attack, like more initial wins off the line, like win off the line, either with your speed or with your hands, whatever the case may be. I also think the ends need better counter moves. That is something that I felt was lacking a lot last year from the edge. The edge just didn't have a really good, what's your plan? And this was especially true of Viper. What's your plan if your initial move doesn't work? Great pass rushers are units to that great pass rush. I'm trying to think of the ways. Great pass rushers go into each play with a plan. There's a strategy involved. It's not just I'm rushing with speed. Well, yeah, but okay, what are you doing to set up that speed rush? What are you doing if that tackle oversets? What are you doing if that tackle undersets? What do you do if you don't necessarily get off to a great start? There's got to be a plan. I'm going to do this to come here. And sometimes part of your plan is, okay, I'm not necessarily the primary target here or primary rusher here, but I'm going to use this play to set up something the next time that we make this call. So I'm going to rush real hard. I'm going to lean right into that. And I'm going to get this guy thinking this is what I'm doing. And then on this next time that we get into a situation and we make this call, I'm going to come off like he's thinking that. and then I'm going to spin back inside or club them, give them the inside club and knock them out, and then you come underneath. There's this plan involved. And when I watched the defensive line last year, with the exception of Javonte Jean-Baptiste, nobody had a plan on the edge. Nobody had a plan. There was some to a degree inside, but nobody had a plan on the edge. There was no, okay, what's your counter? If that's not working, what are you going with? And there were too many times where, with Jordan Botelho, for example, he'd keep trying the same move over and over again and nothing. And then you'd bring in and you say, well, yeah, that's just Jordan Botelho's problem. Well, then they'd bring in Josh Burnham and Junior Tuamaka, and they're doing the same exact thing, and it's just not working. Well, what's your counter to that? What's Al Golden and Al Washington doing to counter that? That's coaching. And that's something where the coaching can get better. That's something where the players can get better and need to get better. And if this unit's going to be that elite group that can rush the quarterback in the biggest moments and in the biggest games, those things are going to be important. Those counter moves are going to be essential when you're playing the best offensive lines and when you're playing in the postseason. So they're going to have to be there. And then here, consistency is something else that we need to see from this line. They weren't always the most consistent unit. The depth that they're going to have this year should help with that. One of the things Coach Washington is going to have to do is figure out ways to better utilize his depth. And I'm not saying he did anything wrong last year. It's one of those things where I'm trying to think how to say this. It was understandable why you weren't going to take Howard Cross and Riley Mills off the field last year. In a lot of instances, especially when Gabriel Rubio got hurt, there was a big drop-off between your starters and your number twos. So it was understandable why there was that rotation. This year, I don't think you're going to have that same problem. I think with Gabriel Rubio back, hopefully he stays healthy, but with Jason Onye, with Donovan Heinisch, with the young players you have on the roster, there's no excuse not to have a deeper rotation this year. And it's needed more this year because you do have if you're going to win it all, you're going to be playing 16 games. So you need to plan accordingly as you go through the regular season to say, hey, look, there's just certain games where we're going to be careful about the reps that we give Howard and Riley. So when you're playing Northern Illinois and Purdue and Miami of Ohio and Navy, not that you do what Notre Dame did against Ball State where you rep your backups a lot, but that week of practice, maybe you take 10 snaps of practice off of them, and then you get to the game and you take some of the wear and tear off of them. Hey, look, they've had a great 2 weeks. So as you're getting ready to play Miami of Ohio, maybe you back off of them a little bit in practice reps. Those are things you have to do, that load management that you have to do in practice and in games, because a lot of people say, well, play 10 less snaps a game. And okay, sure, I buy that. But it's really 10 snaps in a game is not really the issue. It's you're getting a ton of reps in practice also that needs to be monitored and say, hey, look, let's, Tuesday they're going to be full go, but Wednesday we peel those back a little bit for those couple veterans. Thursday we definitely peel them back a little bit, and then they're fresh on Saturday. In certain weeks you got, hey guys, all hands on deck this week, baby. This is what we got to do. But I think you need to plan for how the game is now to do that. There's more up tempo, more plays, more snaps, more speed, longer seasons. Those things are needed. So you're going to have a plan for that. You're going to absolutely flat out have to have a plan for that. And so that's where they're going to have to be. And there's two other things. Number one is Coach Washington's going to have to do a better job of coaching up younger players. This is my biggest question mark without Washington. I know that Al Washington can take established players, coach them up, and make them really, really good. And it's not just because of last year. Go look at what he did in 2016 as well. When you look at the BC defensive line that he had in 2016. Really, really good. And so we know he can do that. The question we have is, can he build up the younger players that weren't coached by Mike Elston and Larry Johnson and get them ready to go? Yes, you've got RJ Oben, you've got the veterans you have, but this season is going to be dependent upon ultimately, yes, you have these veterans, but to go from really good or even maybe great to truly elite, best of the best, national championship caliber, you're going to need Bubakar Traore. You're going to need Josh Burnham. You're going to need Bryce Young. You're going to need one of the young tackles, whether it's Brennan Vernon, whether it's Sean Sevillano, whether it's Devin Houston, whoever that may be. You're going to need to get one of those younger guys also to be ready to take that step. There's no doubt Jason Onye kind of counts as part of that as well. You're going to have to be there. If you can't get those guys to take a jump this year, then I got major questions about whether or not the success we saw the last year and what I expect this year is sustainable. When you have a team, it's like, remember what I talked about yesterday? With Charlie Weiss, he took a group of players that had a foundation already been laid, and he was able to make them great for 2 years. But once those guys were all gone, and it now came down to he had to coach up the guys that only he had developed, big drop-off. Is that going to be the case without Washington? We won't truly know that answer until 2025. However, if this season Boubacar makes a jump and Josh Burnham makes a jump and Bryce Young's ready to help, and I forgot Armel Mukam earlier. You can throw him in there, who's got tons of upside. One of Armel or Brennan Vernon, or actually I think a couple, if those guys are able to then also take a jump and contribute, and you say, okay, Coach Washington's doing a really good job with these younger players. He can also build, right? He can also lay the foundation. With the current D-line, the foundation's been already laid by somebody else. You just got to build on it. We know he can build, but now we're going to find out. I said we know he'll be able to build. I meant to say we know he can build. Now we're going to find out if he can lay the foundation first, then build. Because if you can't lay the foundation, the building never happens. I mean, again, I like to use examples. Try building a house in a windy part of the country where you just come in and you just start stacking wood on the ground around and you build it up, and you're going to like, why this house fall down? You had no foundation. There's no foundation to be that rock that you're building on top of. And that's the thing he has to show that he can do. And I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm saying he's never really had a chance to do that, or he's never been anywhere long enough. He was a D-line coach for a year at Boston College. He was a D-line coach for a year at Cincinnati. He was a linebacker coach for only 3 seasons at Ohio State, and he was at Michigan for like a year. And then now he's only been at Ohio State or Notre Dame for 2 years. So we haven't seen it. So it's not that he can't do it. It's we don't know. And this year he'll get a chance to show that because he's going into year 3 at Notre Dame, and he's got some very, very talented young players. And if those guys don't step up and play well this year, then you have to start to say, okay, what's going on? What's the issue here? And we're going to find if we can do that. And here's the final piece to this puzzle for the defensive line. How can the defensive line get better? How can they be more impactful? Well, a lot of things go into this from a coaching standpoint and scheme standpoint that has to do with Al Golden and has to do with Max Bulla and how the linebackers play. But at the end of the day, ultimately has to be a defensive line thing with Coach Washington and the players. They got to finish better. And if you look at Notre Dame's production last year, and I talked about how their sacks were way down and their tackles for loss were way down, I would argue that they were actually more disruptive than they were the year before. I mean, this past year, they had 267 pressures, and they had, as a defense, 92 hits on the quarterback. In 2022, when they had more sacks, they only had 225 total pressures and only 84 hits on the quarterback. So they were more disruptive, in my opinion, but they were less impactful than what they were in past years. In 2021, same deal. Fewer, less pressures, more hits on the quarterback. They had more hits on the quarterback last year than even the 2021 team that had more sacks. And this is the deal. They just have to finish better. I think this is especially true for Riley Mills. If Riley Mills made actual tackles or sacks on half the plays that he had pressures where he didn't finish, he would have had 11, 12 tackles for loss, 6, 7, 8 sacks last year. He was really good. Really, really good. And he's got to finish better. The edge players have to finish better. The Vipers have to finish a lot better. Those are all aspects to this defense really taking a jump. And because I say defense purposely, because as I said, it's really about the defense is going to go as far as the D-line can take it. I really believe that. Somebody said in the chat earlier, Notre Dame won't be able to blitz as much if Benjamin Morrison's hurt. Completely disagree with that. I think it's the exact opposite. If Benjamin Morrison is hurt, you blitz more, just for a host of reasons. But to your point, there does need to be. So I agree with the second part of what was said, but I don't agree with the why. I think this is true for any defense. You have to be able to dominate with just your D-line at times. You're going to play some team in the regular season or in the postseason that is going to have a plan to exploit your blitz packages and actually have some success with it. Doesn't happen often, but they will. And when you look at that Ohio State game late in the fourth quarter, not just on the game-winning drive, but there were times when Notre Dame rushed 3 or 4 and got nothing. And that allowed them to make some plays. There has to be an opportunity for you to rush 4 and have success with 4. Whether that's 3 D linemen drop the Viper and bring a backer, it's fine. But you're going to have to get more of a finish there. You've got to finish better with your D-line. There's more impact production needed from the D-line, because if the D-line plays to its potential, it impacts the linebackers a whole lot more than the linebackers playing well impacts the defense positively. And a defensive line that's playing at an elite level and finishing well is going to have a much bigger impact on the secondary than an elite secondary is going to have on the defensive line. You want them playing together, and that's going to be the big key. And if they can do that, then this team is flat. I mean, look, folks, I'll wrap it up with this before we go to buy, sell, or hold. There's an opportunity for Notre Dame to have arguably the best O-line, D-line combination in the country next year. I'm not banking on it because I don't think the O-line is going to quite get to that level. But there aren't many teams in the country that have more talent than what Notre Dame has on the offensive line. There aren't a whole lot of teams in the country that have more experience and depth than what Notre Dame has on the defensive line. You've got a chance to be special there, but the coaching is going to have to be really good to accomplish the things we talked about. And that means if there is success, then you got to tip your cap to Coach Washington and Coach Rudolph for the job that they did. And if there isn't success, then Coach Freeman's going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out, like, do I have the right people in charge? I'm optimistic about the answer to that, but we're going to find out. It's going to have to be proven. So we're going to get the buy, sell, or hold next, everybody, but we're going to just wrap up with that. Before we do, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you have not done so, I tell you this every day, and I mean it every time. If you're not on the message board, you're missing out. Absolutely missing out. It's a great community. We don't just talk ball. I mean, we had one of our customers went in and had some had a concern, had to go to the hospital, an emergency situation. I'm going to put the message on the board, but he just texted me back today that got some great news. But we talk about life. We talk about, we pray for each other. But of course, there's a lot of football being talked, and we'll put intel on there, breakdowns in there that you just won't get anywhere else. So if you're not a member of the message board at boards.breakdown.com, you're going to want to get in there as soon as possible and check that out. So hey, tell your family you want it for a Father's Day present. That'd be awesome. Tell them that. And it's cheap, and your family can get you something that you're going to love. And you can, think how many things can you get for either $4.99 a month or $49.99 for a year that you can utilize as often as you do our message board and get the kind of feedback and interaction and community that you're going to get. There's just not a lot of places for it. So, if you're telling your family, hey, all I want is something for $4.99 a month, or just something that's $50. Hey, and if they really want to have some fun and also get you some merch, you tell them that they can sign up for one of the booster clubs. And if they sign up for one of those, they can not only get you the membership, but they sign up for the gold or the Shamrock or the blue club, you also get an IB club mug. And if they sign up for the gold club annual membership in our booster club, they get a free IB club, gold club shirt and an IB mug. So let your guys out there, if you're a father, make sure you let your family members know that you would love an IB membership, especially a booster club membership, as we get ready for Father's Day. All right, you guys know what the final segment of today's show is going to be. And that is the buy, sell, or hold. We're going to have some fun with this, and there's a lot of them. There was not many that I didn't bring up. There were some, like there's a lot of Tyler Buckner questions, so I just kind of picked the one that I wanted to answer from that group. But we're just going to dive right into it and have some fun. So we're going to kick things off with Irish Gordy Knott. And he says, buy, sell, or hold. Noah Grubbs and Deuce Knight will team up in recruiting and will be instrumental in landing 2 5-star or 5-star upside receivers either 1 each in 25 and 26 or 2 and 26. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to sell on I'm going to make this sort of 2. I'm going to cheat because I can. I'm going to kind of do a little something different with this. So I'm going to take your submission as 2 parts. One is 2 5-star guys. They're current 5 stars. And then the other one is going to be looking at it from the standpoint of upsides. So 2 5-stars, sell. I don't think they're going to get 2 5-star right now players. I mean, if you look back in past years, I think Cam Williams was a 5-star, and I can't tell you the last time that they had a 5-star before that. I probably have to go back to Michael Floyd back in 2008 when they had a 5-star grade now. Now, there's some 5-star upside guys that Notre Dame had, but now that second part, I'm going to buy because I do think there's a chance that they get a couple 5-star upside guys. I do. So I'm gonna buy that. I mean, it's a slight a lean towards hold initially, but I'm gonna buy it because I do think if we're gonna talk about upside, there is a chance that they get that these next couple of years, especially. But here's the thing: it'll be partly about Deuce and Noah, but it's gonna have to also be about Riley Leonard and what happens this season. Like, look, you can love Deuce and Noah all you want. But if Notre Dame's pass game's not producing and the offense isn't producing, it won't matter. Because, like, yeah, you guys are great players, but why the heck are you playing in that offense? Because you're not going to put up a lot of yards. It's going to really have to be a lot about what they do on the field as well. Christopher Crosby, buy, sell, or hold. Despite Ole Miss adding an excellent portal class to an already good roster, buy, sell, or hold, Alabama wins the SEC West. Well, I'm gonna buy that. And when I did my top 10 a few weeks ago, gosh, it's been over a month now. I actually said that I had Bama ranked higher than Ole Miss I believe I said that. I have Alabama ranked higher than Ole Miss in the top 25. And it's for a couple reasons. Number one is Ole Miss still has a lot to prove. And Lane Kiffin has never had 2 good back-to-back seasons in a row. If he can do it this year, it'll be his first. And they're capable of it, but sure, they got a lot to prove. And the other part of it too is, Ole Miss going against the better teams in the league has still not been overly competitive in a lot of instances. I mean, you look at last year, yeah, they beat LSU last year, but they got blown out by Georgia. They got beat convincingly by Bama by 2 touchdowns. In 2022, they got blown out by LSU. They lost to Alabama. They didn't play Georgia. So when you look at what Ole Miss has done, even in their good years, they just haven't. I mean, they were a 10-win team in 2021, played Alabama, got doubled up 42-21. So they've got a lot to prove to me that they can be that team and go out there and really kind of have the success that you need to have. I mean, again, I could point out lots of instances where when they've had to play the best teams in the league, they often not only do they lose, they're often not competitive. Now, does that mean that that's going to continue in 2024? I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is like, if we're being honest, look, if this is what they're going to do, then they need to show that they can do this first, right? We say that about Notre Dame all the time. So we're being consistent. If Notre Dame wants to be one of the best teams in the country, they got to prove they can beat Ohio State. They got to prove they can beat Georgia. They got to prove that they can beat Bama. And that's why we're not picking Notre Dame to win it all this year. And somebody said, well, they did destroy Penn State, though. So what? I think you all know my stance on Penn State. And Penn State's not that good of a football team. And they beat them by 13 points. So when you look at the total score between the two teams, it was not, you look at what their score was against Georgia and Bama, and then you look at what it was against Penn State, it wasn't that different. And their defense last season gave up 506 yards and had averaged over 7 yards per play against Penn. They gave that up to Penn State. So their defense needs a lot of work. And the other part of it too is, guys, we act like Bama lost this guy and that guy, and that's all true. And they lost Nick Saban, who's a legend, greatest coach of my generation. But at the same time, let's not act like Bama's got this really crap roster, right? Like all of a sudden, Bama's not a very good football team. Bama's going to be just fine. And the coach that they replaced Nick Saban with is not exactly a bum. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about Kalen DeBoer. I mean, I've brought this up before. All that guy does is win. He's won everywhere he's ever been. I think he won 4 national titles in the NAIA level. He won at Fresno. He won at Washington. Took over a Washington team with 4-8. Do you think he inherits? Do you think he has a better roster now or when he took over at Washington. Let's be honest about that. So I think they're going to be fine. Are they going to be as dominant maybe as they were in peak Saban era? Probably not, but I don't think anybody's going to be that dominant. But I'm still going with Bama over Ole Miss until Ole Miss proves it. It's kind of like if I were to ask you guys, well, hey, how many of y'all think that Notre Dame should be ranked higher than Georgia this year? We say, well, no, you'd say you're nuts. Why? Why would you say that? Notre Dame's been a lot more competitive in their two matchups against Georgia than Ole Miss has been against Bama and Georgia. Think about that for a second. Well, it's because of the track record. Georgia has a track record, Notre Dame doesn't, and the same thing is true for them. And they're going to be just fine. Alabama's going to be just fine. They're going to be fine at receiver. They're going to be fine in the secondary. They're going to be fine. You know, they've got Kobe Prentice coming back. They got Jeremy Bernard transferred in from Washington, who was a good player for them last year. They're going to be just fine. They have some freshmen coming into play. They're going to be fine. Bama's going to be really good. To me, they're a top 5 to 7 team for me in my preseason ranking. They're going to be just fine. So I need to see Ole Miss prove it first. So good one, Christopher. I like that one. Greg Nielsen, buy, sell, or hold. By the end of the 2024 season, Billy Schrouth will have a legitimate decision to make on entering the NFL draft, meaning reasonable projection of round 1 to 3 pick. Look, if Billy Schrouth comes out for the NFL draft with anything short of a first-round draft pick, he's making a mistake. I think Blake Fisher made a mistake. Unless Billy Schrouth is just done with football or college, then there's just no reason for him to come out unless he is a surefire, no doubt about it, first-round pick. The odds of him being a first-round, no doubt about it, first-round pick after his junior season as a guard is slim. So I'm selling this. I think Billy Schrouth is going to be an excellent player. But NFL teams don't love offensive linemen that only have 1 year of starting experience, and especially someone who's a true junior. He'll need to come back, and it would be ill-advised for him not to come back. I don't care how good he is this year. I mean, look, here's the deal. If Quentin Nelson stayed 4 years, then Billy Schrouth can stay 4 years. That's how I look at it. Buy, sell, or hold. I love this name. Ann Arbor Peakton High School. That's great. Buy, sell, or hold. Looking at the parity this year among the top college teams without a 2018 Clemson or 2020 Bama, winning 2 playoff games should be the floor for this Notre Dame team. I'm going to sell that because just in theory, I'm going to sell that. And I talked about this yesterday. I still say the floor is a playoff +1. That's the floor. But in order to say that, we also talked about how we got to know who that second-round opponent is. I mean, we're having a different conversation if we're talking about Notre Dame playing a 2 or 3 loss K-State team, or if. And here's the thing. Let's say the Big 12 champ has 3 losses, and the 5th best team is Memphis at 10-2 or 11-1. Okay, now the conversation is a little bit different. Now we should be talking about Notre Dame needing to win 2 playoff games. But without any context, the floor is still 1. Win 1 playoff game and get to the next round and be competitive. That's still the floor for what this football team should be. So I'm going to sell that. Do it to it. Buy, sell, or hold. Between the quarterbacks already on scholarship and 2 current commits, Notre Dame has 2 future first-round picks at quarterback. So you've expanded a little bit. So you're going to go basically Riley Leonard, Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr, Deuce Knight, and Riley Leonard. Noah Grubbs. Between that 6, there is 2 first-round draft picks. I'm going to buy that. I do. I think between Riley Leonard and CJ Carr and Deuce Knight and Noah Grubbs, I could see 2 of those guys being that. Yes, I'm going to buy that. Yeah. I can understand why everybody in the chat's selling it. Totally get it, but I'm buying that. I am Tenzin. Buy, sell, or hold. The Notre Dame offense will score 40-plus points a game and have over 7.5 yards per play. I'm going to sell that. I don't think they're going to do both. I could certainly see the offense being at 40-plus points per game, 7.5 yards per play, but I don't think they're going to be both. And here's the other part of it too, Tenzin. The reality is Notre Dame doesn't need to score 40-plus points a game on the season. Part of the reason that LSU did what they did last year is they had to. They had to score 45 points a game or they couldn't win. They had to have average 8 yards a play or they couldn't win. So I don't think you're going to get that. And here's the other part of it. Ole Miss played in a lot more competitive games than what I think Notre Dame is going to be playing in this year. And when you are playing in a lot of blowout games, you're going to have a lot of instances where your backups come in and don't average the same number of points per play and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna sell that. I'm not saying it's impossible at all. I mean, but the Notre Dame record for yards per play is 7.0. And that was an offense that had Deshaun Kaiser and CJ Prosise and Josh Adams and Dexter Williams and Will Fuller and Amir Carlisle and Chris Brown and the best offensive line in college football with Ronnie Stanley and Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and Alex Bars. Actually, no, it wasn't Alex Bars. It was Steve Elmer and Sam Mustafa or Nick Martin at center. I mean, that was the best line in college football that year. And they still only averaged 7.0 yards per play. So I'm going to sell that just because I think they could be an elite offense this year and not get to either one of those numbers. I think the 40 points per game, I would hope that they could get to because of the way that the schedule's set up. Like I think people are totally disrespecting Notre Dame's schedule this year, but I'm also not going to try and pretend like this is the 2017 gauntlet either. You know, you should have a shot to get there. It's really going to come down to keep doing what you're doing. It's what we talked about yesterday. Keep doing what you're doing and against the teams that are inferior, and then up your play against those other teams. But so I could see them getting to 40 points per game. They were 39.2 last year. The harder thing is going to be the latter one, in my opinion. Here's the other part too. If you get into a situation where you play 3-4 games in the postseason, it's going to make it harder for you to reach this number. So you'd have to say, hey, look, regular season, like, could they do it in regular season? That would be more along the lines of the question. So we're going to have to see it. Now, defensively, the defense is going to go up fewer than 15 points per game and less than 3.6 yards per play. So last year, obviously, Notre Dame's defense was very good. They gave up 15.9 points per game, and the defense also gave up 4.4 yards per play. So you're saying that the defense this season is going to give up less than 15, and they're going to give up 3.66 yards per play or less. There's no way in heck that I'm taking that one. I'm selling that one like crazy. And let me go back and look. I'm trying to find this when I'm in 8, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. The last time that a defense gave up fewer than 3.9 yards per play. 3.9, which is well above your average. The last time a defense gave up less than 3.9 yards per play was all the way back in 2011 Alabama. So I'm selling the heck out of that because that is a all-time generational holy moly yards per play average. But I'll say this, if they even sniff that 3.6 number, if they're even 4 or below, then they'll be less than 15 points, no doubt. But again, you guys have to think about some of this stuff. Like some of you guys get so wrapped up in stats, and you know, I say what I say about the offense, and somebody says that's depressing. Like, what are you talking about? Like, we're talking about whether or not because of some blowouts, they're going to be less than 7.5 yards. Because of some blowout situations, they may not set the all-time record in yards per play. They may not set the all-time record in points at the school. Some of you just like want to be negative for some reason. Like what I'm saying is Notre Dame, because they may be so up at halftime on some teams, may play their younger guys more, that it's going to keep you from, scoring 60 on a team, which then is going to make it harder to score 40. That's depressing to you. Or if I say something along the lines of, I don't know, you go out this season and you only score 27 in certain games, you're averaging 38, 39 points per game, but you're going out and winning football games. Well, that's depressing because the stat didn't equal whatever. Like that stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like you can say, hey, look, this teams that win average this, that's fine. But to say it's depressing that Notre Dame doesn't set an all-time record in those two stats because my argument being they might play too many playoff games to get there, or they may play in too many blowouts where they don't play their starters but for more than 2.5 quarters, that's depressing to you. Your focus is on the wrong things. It is flat out on the wrong things. And so I'm just going to have to say you're a little off on that one. So Airball VW with a buy, sell, or hold. USC will have 3 or more losses by Thanksgiving. So let's look at USC's record. I'm leaning towards selling that because I've said before I think USC is going to be a better team than people think. I actually have USC with getting 3 losses this year, but I think one of those 3 losses will be to Notre Dame. So they open up against LSU, then Utah State, at Michigan, Wisconsin, at Minnesota, home against Penn State, at Maryland, home against Rutgers, at Washington, home against Nebraska, at UCLA. So give me wins. Utah State was not gimmies. Games not easily predict them. See, what I mean by easy is not that it's going to be an easy win, but like I'm comfortable with this chalking this up as a win. Utah State at home, Wisconsin at home, at Minnesota, at Maryland, Rutgers at home, Nebraska at home, at UCLA. I think UCLA is going to take a big step back. So that's 7 wins right there. So there's 5 other games. So to me, you look at, well, there's really 4 other games. LSU on a neutral field, at Michigan, home against Penn State, and at Washington. They have to go 1-3 in those games to be where you're talking about. And I just don't think they will. I mean, look, USC battled Washington last year. I mean, they were competitive against Washington for a while last year. And Washington, to me, it was a much better team last year than they're going to be this year. And I think Washington's going to take a bit of a step back this year. I really do. Actually, it wasn't last year USC was competitive. Yeah, it was USC. Yeah, it was last year. They lost 52-42, and they scored on them. It was a very competitive game. And so I think that's a game that they're going to win. I look at the rest of it, and I say, LSU maybe. I'm not in love with LSU as a team this year. They'll be good, but I think that's a winnable game for USC. I'm going to say let's say that's a loss. And Michigan on the road, I don't know what to make of Michigan this year. I tend to lean towards that being a loss because USC has a lot to prove. And then it comes down to, okay, now you got Penn State at home. I think they win that game. And then you got at Washington. I think they win that game. So I think USC is going to be 9-2 going into the Notre Dame game. That's what I think they're going to be. I get you guys. I feel y'all on USC. I mean, you watched them play last year like I did. They weren't very good. They really were. They were terrible in a lot of ways. But this is a team with a lot of talent. Lincoln Riley's back is against the wall. He was forced to make some changes. I don't mean forced like the admin forced him, but I think he was forced at the very least by circumstance to make some big changes next year. So, when I look at it, they had a tough stretch last year, but I still think they're a more talented team than people are giving credit for. And I think that not having a guy like Caleb Williams is going to force him to go back to kind of his roots a little bit and be a more balanced football team. And that's going to make them a better football team. I really do. I really do. I'm not as down on USC as some of you are. And I understand why you are. I totally get it. I'm just not. Do it to it. Buy, sell, or hold between the quarterbacks already on scholarship. And actually, I already have that one. He had another one that says Notre Dame will have another Biletnikoff winner before having a Doak Walker winner. I don't know that Notre Dame, they've never had a Doak Walker winner. I don't believe. I don't think let me just look. I don't believe Notre Dame has ever had a Doak Walker award winner. Let me look at that real quick. I'm pretty sure that is correct. Yeah, it's been around since 1990, and Notre Dame has never had a guy win it. And I think that'll continue. There's just going to be schools that just run the ball so dang much. And there's going to be schools that are just not going to have the depth at running back that Notre Dame's has. So you're going to see the ball split around a lot more. So no, I agree with that. I think I buy that. I definitely buy that. BCR 0214. Buy, sell, or hold. The 85 scholarship limit will increase in the next 5+ years because coaches complain about the amount of injuries that will come from the increased games played each year. I agree with that. I think that they're going to do that. I don't think it's wise. I don't think it's necessary. But yes, I do think that's going to happen. And that's exactly what the coaches are going to be using. Now, the coaches are going to say that, but let's be honest. There's other reasons why that's going to be the case or why coaches are going to fight for that. It's also because the more scholarships that I can take as an Ohio State, as a Bama, as a Notre Dame, the more scholarships I can give, the fewer scholarships that are going to the teams that are competing. So you're going to see a greater gap between the haves and have-nots if this happens. And I think there's a good chance it will happen. And I hope it not, but it will. And then the other one is the biseller hold. The 85 scholarship limit will not be as important as for teams as they will use loopholes in NIL as a new scholarship. Potentially. I mean, it's gonna come down to what the new rules are. That's really what it's gonna come down to. It's gonna come down to what the new rules are. Some of you are missing the boat a little bit on this scholarship thing, because the reality is you still have to pay walk-ons. And right now you have 110 to 120 man rosters. So what people are talking about is upping scholarships and eliminating walk-ons. So if you up scholarships and eliminate walk-ons, you don't have to pay as many people. So you're actually saving money. So you're off on that a little bit, in my opinion. That's the push. I don't know that it'll happen, but that's the push. I don't think it should, but that's the push. Salty Virginia Peanuts, buy, sell, or hold. The new rules on player compensation will not force Notre Dame, with its committed donor base and sports-related income, to trim its non-revenue sports as other schools will do. This will put many Irish sports programs at a competitive advantage. Possibly. I hope so. But I can't. I'm going to hold on that one. I will say this. I know for a fact that is something that the previous president cares about. And I had a couple of people reach out to me and explain to me that his statement when the settlement was reached said basically the settlement, his comments, I should say, were geared towards getting to the point where he's talking about the settlements, and he basically said that they want to still have, I forget the word he used, like equity or something like that. But it basically was geared towards saying we want to make sure that we're not getting rid of women's sports. But at the end of the day, I mean, at the end of the day, we're sitting in a situation where, I mean, dollars and cents. Like, look, there was like a congressman in California made some proposal that you basically you're making it illegal to get rid of women's sports. And this is why the NCAA sucks, because we've now put the future of college sports in the hands of morons. And the vast majority of people who are elected to Congress, either at the state level or the national level, are just morons who don't understand the stuff that they're making laws about. And so, well, this guy's being a former athlete doesn't mean you understand basic economics. I know plenty of former athletes that don't understand basic economics. Here's the deal. If I have to pay players X amount of dollars, and I'm only making X amount of dollars in return, and the amount that I have to pay X amount of dollars, because you're guaranteeing that I have to pay for certain sports, then guess what? I go out of business. Like, if any business in America ran their business like these idiots in state legislatures and the federal government especially ran their quote-unquote business, we would no longer have a business. We would go out of business. You cannot mandate that people be forced to spend money they don't have. You can't say, well, you have to pay X amount of dollars to football and basketball players, but you also have to pay this, this, and this. And the money's not miraculously going to get greater. Yes, schools need to do a better job of managing their money. But at the same time, the things that you're mandating them doing, it's just not going to work. But this is where we are, because the NCAA is filled with a bunch of greedy you-know-whats the last 50 years, especially the last 20, 30 years since the TV stuff came into play. They got us into this situation. They're the ones that put us in this situation where, you know, we have to be hoping and praying that Congress saves sports. Well, the problem is they're idiots. I mean, have you seen what's happening to our own national debt? They have no concept of you make this or you have this, and it means you can't spend more than this, right? We don't have to live that way. And the problem is, because they live that way, so many of us have come to think that you can spend what you don't have. I just put it on a credit card. Still don't have it. You know, it's like, I remember a conversation I had with my wife when we first got married. We wanted to go get a new TV. And she said, hey, we can go get a new Best Buy credit card, because if you get a Best Buy credit card, then you can do this and you can pay it off. And I'm like, do we have the money or not? She goes, yeah, we have the money. I said, then why would he put it on a credit card? And I said, and if we needed to put it on a credit card because we don't have the money, then we shouldn't buy it. It's simple as that. Like, we bought a new car last year. You know how long it's been since I bought a new car? Do you know why I didn't buy a car before? Because I couldn't pay for it. So when I bought a car last year, I went and wrote a check for the car. Here's the car. You know how many car payments I've paid on that? 1. Because I paid for it right up front. Why? Because I saved up the money to buy the car. Imagine that. You live within your means. But they're going to pass laws that basically say, hey, look, you can't get rid of certain sports. Why? Why? If I can't, if you're mandating that I have to pay people, but then I don't have the money to pay all those people, then I'm going to go out of business. But you're asking people who have no concept of how to run a business, because they can't even run their own houses, to now come up with all the answers to it's just stupid. It's absolutely stupid. So I just have no faith that that's going to work. I think it's just going to get to the point in time where you're just going to have some schools that are just going to drop sports altogether. I mean, because here's the thing. Why do a lot of schools have sports? Well, we have sports because it's a moneymaker. You know, sports drives revenue. Well, what happens when you get to the point where every year you're losing millions of dollars because you have sports programs? Guess what? You're not going to have sports programs anymore. You're just going to say, no, we're not going to get one in women's sports. We're not going to get rid of these. We're going to get rid of all sports. Because there are schools, I know this is crazy, but there are schools that thrive without having great sports teams, or they play at Division III level. I mean, do you think Johns Hopkins is raking in millions and tens of millions of dollars a year on their app? They have a Division III football team. They play D1 lacrosse. Pretty sure they're not raking in the money for their TV deal on the lacrosse team, right? But they're a heck of a school. You don't need all that. And so to Notre Dame specifically, I think Notre Dame is one of the teams that would have a chance to be able to keep all their sports. I do. But there's going to come a point in time where they're just going to keep legislating more and more and more of a cut to the players. Like the 22% cut for the college players, I believe, is more than the percentage of TV revenue that professional sports get. I believe I read that. So I just we're asking idiots to fix problems created by other idiots. That's basically what our country has turned into. And that's sad. And this isn't a right or left thing, because you should, if you're on the left, you should be saying the same thing I am. And if you're on the right, you should be saying the same thing I am. They're all idiots. There's a guy here, guy there, girl here, girl there. But as a whole, they're all idiots. The NCAA is filled with a bunch of idiots. Greedy idiots. Congress is filled with a lot of greedy idiots. I mean, there's certain things we should all be able to agree on. That should be one of them. Because nobody can look at how our country is run right now, and whether it's the last 4 years or the 4 before that or the 20 before that, I don't care if it's an R or D in charge. We are run by greedy, corrupt morons. And they're the ones that we're saying, I hope you can fix this. Please fix this. We need you idiots to save us from what we have created. That's where we're at in college sports. We're asking those idiots to fix college sports. That's really sad. Really, really sad. B. Plentz, 1189, Trey Taylor, buy, sell, or hold. Trey Taylor will be Notre Dame's 2027 quarterback commit signee. Notre Dame will, and this the first. I'm gonna hold on that, because I do know they like Trey a lot. I would be okay with that, but I know there's a couple other quarterbacks they like a lot as well. Buy, sell, or hold. Notre Dame will only sign 4 receivers in the 2025 class. I'm going to buy that, Brandon. I know they're going to try for 5, but to hit to 5, it's like what Ryan and I were talking about the other day. To get to 5, you're going to have to hit the inside straight, basically. I mean, we had an article on Malik Clark the other day, and then he drops his top 5 and doesn't have Notre Dame in it. Now, he's going to visit Notre Dame, but, I mean, what are the odds they go from not in his top 5 to landing him? It's not great. So you're down to 2 now. I like where they're at with John Anthony Hall. You've got Dylan Robinson, Tanook Hines, and Derek Meadows on the board. I don't love where they're at with Derek Meadows. Tanook Hines, we'll see. Dylan Robinson, we'll see. So I could see them only getting 4. And I'm okay with that. It'd still be, depending on who you get, it's still going to be a good class, but it's not what it should have been. Now it's about, okay, you had a really good class in 23. And I'm just talking about the guys that are left. I mean, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and KK Smith's a pretty talented trio of players. And then, of course, you have last year's 3-man class, and you get 4 this year. And there's two guys in there that I like a lot. If you get John Anthony Hall, and then if you get a third guy, probably, if it's Tanook Hines or whoever, then you feel good about that one too. So, I'm going to buy that. I'd like to see him get to 5 just for the class needs and who's in the class. But at the same time, you also start thinking about, like, boy, is 5 receivers in one class really the best roster management type situation? I don't know that it is. And so I'm gonna go with you. I'm gonna buy that. Coach Mikey Mike 007 assign 1 buy, sell, or hold to each possible commitment. So I get the impression from Coach Mikey Mike that I can give 1 to each. So that I'm assuming he means you can do a buy, a sell, or a hold. And so I'm gonna. I don't know that I want to sell any of those. So I'm going to change it on you, Coach Mikey Mike. I'm going to change it to you can do buy, sell, or hold for each one, because I don't want to sell any of those 3. So with Nathaniel Usu-Boateng, I'm going to go hold. I think they've done a great job getting in with him, but there's still work to be done. And this visit coming up this weekend is going to have to be a very, very important part of that. I'm going to buy Madden Fair Emo coming into this weekend, and I'm going to buy Jadon Blair. So that's where I'm at on those. 3rd and 7 duo, buy, sell, or hold. Marcus Freeman gets multiple natties and goes down as a Notre Dame legend along with Newt, Frank, Era, and Lou. I'm in a good mood today, and it's the offseason. I'm going to buy that. I mean, if he gets 2, that's going to happen, right? I mean, if he gets 2, then yeah, I mean, geez. Era had 2. Lou had 1. Frank Leahy ran 4. Newt won 3. Right, so Newt won 3. Frank Coach Leahy won 4, I believe. Right, so that's 7. Era had 2, that's 9. Divine had 1. Lou had 1, that's 11. Right, so if he gets 2, he ties Era and passes Lou. So yeah, I think that would make him a Notre Dame legend, right? So I'm going to buy it because I'm in a good mood, and I really like the direction the program's going. Ben Tarnowski, buy, sell, or hold. The 2025 class will be the greatest Notre Dame class of all time. I am going to sell that one, and I'm going to sell that one with some ferocity because best all time. I mean, first of all, I don't know if that's going to be the best all-time, the best class of the Marcus Freeman tenure. And I'm not talking about looking forward to what they may get down the road. I'm talking about, I don't know that the 25 class, even if they get everything that we hope that they're going to get, I don't know if that's going to be as good as the last 2 classes. I mean, maybe it passes one of them, but I don't know if it's going to pass that. So I'm going to sell that. And reasons why I'm selling, I don't think the receiver class is going to be quite strong enough. The running back class I like for what they're trying to do, but it's not a great class. You look at the D-line class, it's good, but it's not great. The secondary class is elite. The quarterback is big time. The tight end is big time. The O-line class is outstanding. The linebacker class has a chance to be outstanding. So certain position groups could maybe be in that conversation, but as a whole, I'm going to say no. And let me just read to you who was in the 1990 recruiting class. Okay. I'm going to go by position. Kevin McDougal, quarterback. I'm going to read them all, just the top ones. Jerome Bettis at running back. Aaron Taylor on the offensive line. Tim Ruddy on the offensive line. Bryant Young on the defensive line. Jim Flanagan on the defensive line. Oliver Gibson on the defensive line. Brian Hamilton on the defensive line. Pete Bursich at linebackers. Basically all starters on the 93 team. Jeff Burris. Tom Carter. Greg Lane. John Covington. My dude Oscar McBride. Lake Dawson. And Clint Johnson were all in that 1990 class. That was a phenomenal class. An absolutely phenomenal class. So, and talking to Lou Samoji, a lot of those guys were big-time prospects too. We're looking back at them and what they were, what they became. But, talking to Lou Samoji, they were considered an elite class at the time. They were a great class. I'm going to see if he has he went through one of these years and did sort of a look back at the greatest classes of all time. And I was seeing if he had anything about how many parade All-Americans were in that group or whatever the case may be. But because that's what they based things off of back then. It's like there's a couple recruiting services, but a lot of it was A lot of it was, the parade All-Americans, things along those lines. So, yeah, I'm going to sell that one, buddy. Hayden 32 has 3 of them. Number 1, buy, sell, or hold. Notre Dame signs Nathaniel Usu-Boateng and Madden Farimo. Again, I'm being a little charitable today, so I'm going to say buy. Let's have some fun with that. Say buy. I think it's possible. I think there's a better chance they get both than they get neither. The second one, the recommitment, buy, sell, or hold. The recommitment of Sean Terry works out in Notre Dame's favor. I think he meant decommitment, because when I first put this question in there, I was like, yeah, I'm going to sell that, because I'm thinking he's thinking it's going to recommitment. He's going to recommit to Notre Dame. And I think he meant decommitment, and I'm going to buy that. I think the decommitment is going to work out better for Notre Dame. They're going to be able to fill that spot with a better player, is where I think Hayden was going with that, and I agree with that. And then buy, sell, or hold. Notre Dame has a Heisman-winning quarterback within the next 5 years. Well, look, I mean, I've said Notre Dame's going to win a national championship in the next 5 years, so I think there's a good chance that if they do, their quarterbacks puts up big-time numbers. But even then, I'm going to – oh, boy – I'm going to sell that they have a Heisman Trophy winner. I think they'll have at least a finalist, because I just look at the makeup of this team, and I just wonder if a quarterback's going to be able to do enough pass game production to match up with some of the other really good teams that throw the ball a lot more. Because let's say in 3 years Notre Dame wins a champion. Let's say in 2 years Notre Dame wins a title, and they beat Bama in the title game or semifinals. Well, for Bama to be that good, they're going to have a quarterback that's going to put up ridiculous numbers, and they're still going to be really, really good. So Notre Dame may end up beating them in the postseason, but the Heisman will already be handed out by then. And the odds are that Alabama quarterback would throw for a lot more yards, and there's talented quarterbacks there as well. You look Dylan Lonergan. They had the Austin Mack kid last year. They just got the Keelan Russell flipped his commit from SMU, very talented player from Texas. So it's going to be tough to numbers wise, but I think they'll have at least one finalist. I'll say that, but I don't know that they're going to have a winner. I'm not quite there yet. 13. And here's the other thing too, is like, if Brady Quinn couldn't finish in the top 2, like ever, then it's, and he was about as marketable as you're going to get. I don't know that they're going to be able to have, although you could say, well, if they would have beat USC, maybe Brady does win it. And that's fair, but that's going to be tough to do. 13 reasons why. Buy, sell, or hold. With the SEC and Big Ten bringing in traditional powerhouse programs, creating high-value TV matchups, it won't be long before they drop schools, so the powerhouse schools get an even bigger share of the revenue. I highly doubt that. I mean, yeah, I'm selling that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but I don't think schools – I mean, number one, you guys are all trying to turn this in the NFL. There was a message board – post the other day where someone's like, you go to 40 teams and you play all these, and I'm like, guys, these are kids. These are 18 to 21-year-olds. They are not prepared physically to play very good teams 12 times a year. I mean, look how worn out Notre Dame was last year, just playing Ohio State, Duke, and Louisville in back-to-back games. These are not professional athletes. You can say they're professional athletes from the standpoint of like their value and the money they're making. That's fine. I'm more referring to age and development, and they're not 25, 28, 30-year-old grown-ups. They're still a lot of these kids are still teenagers. And so this notion that they're just going to go to this 40-team thing and they could try to do it, but that'd be terrible for young people. Terrible, in my opinion. And I just think ultimately there's going to be certain contracts. I mean, you're going to see a team like, let's say they try to get rid of Vanderbilt out of the SEC. You don't think Vanderbilt's going to try to sue the heck out of them? If they try to drop Rutgers, you don't think Rutgers is going to sue that? You think these teams are just going to take losing millions and millions and millions of dollars lying down? Well, I guess we should have been better football. They're going to sue the heck out of them, and they knew that. And it's probably going to cost you more to kick those teams out than it would to just pay them and keep them in. And now you've got some guaranteed wins in some of your sports. So I just don't see that. Hoops coach, buy, sell, or hold. Tyler Buckner will play meaningful snaps during the 2024 season with a role such as a punt returner, wildcat quarterback, short yardage, goal line package, and/or short passing game RPO receiver. I'm going to sell that. I think it'd be a great story, but I just don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know. I just got a lot of reasons why, and I'd love it if it did, but selling that. Just your ordinary Joe. I love this one. Buy, sell, or hold that Vince will outdo his Chihuahua line at some point during the regular season. Easily, Joe. Easily. Vince always outdoes himself in those regards. 100% he's going to do that. I'm absolutely buying that, buddy. Irish Texan, buy, sell, or hold. Notre Dame should recruit Dalen Penson as an athlete, along with 4 receivers in the 2025 class, with a plan to move either him or one of the DBs to wide receiver down the road. I would buy the first part, but I'm selling it overall because you put the part of one of the you said or, so I guess I could buy it. I'd take Dalen Penson. I would. I like that kid. He's a good football player. I just don't know if you're going to have room for him. But here's the thing: if you only have 4, like to Brandon's question earlier, if you're only going to get 4 receivers, so let's say that Notre Dame gets John Anthony Hall and Tanook Hines. That's all they get. Or John Anthony Hall and Dylan Robinson. And let's say they miss on either one of Robinson or Hines. They miss on one of those 2, and they miss on Meadows. And they're sitting there at 4. Yes, I would absolutely take Dalen Penson as an athlete. He can play DB. He can be a returner. He could be a receiver. Figure it out. I would absolutely do that. I'm not moving one of the DBs to receiver, though. But so I'm going to buy that. I would take I like Dalen Penson, man. I do. He's not a great player, but man, he's just a good football player and just a competitive guy. And there's a guy like that can play multiple positions. Flat out would love to have a guy like that on your team. The Troll Hunter, here we go. It says, buy, sell, or hold. All 3 service academies make a bowl game. I'm going to buy that. They were all close. Air Force made one. Army qualified for one, but didn't. Or Army was 6-6, but didn't qualify because they didn't play enough FBS teams, I believe is the scenario that happened last year. Yes, they were 6-6, but they played Delaware State and Holy Cross were 2 of their wins. So they only had 4 wins over FBS teams. So they weren't able. So I think they'll be in. Yeah, I'm going to buy that. I could see them all being 6-6 or better. Buy, sell, or hold. Boise State as the Mountain West champion. I'm going to, I'm going to hold that for now because I have not looked at enough of what UNLV has coming back and what San Diego State has coming back with their new coach, who's going to bring a lot more offense there. So I need to see a little bit more of what UNLV has coming back because part of me wants to say I want to sell that because I really like what UNLV had last year. And I think another year in that system could be really good for them. But I need to research that one a little bit more. Buy, sell, or hold. Troy Taylor's poached from Stanford after leading one of the most explosive offenses in the country to a different Power 4 school. I'm selling that because I don't think they're going to have one of the most explosive offenses in the country, but I could see Troy Taylor getting poached, certainly. But I think you're probably maybe a year away from that. I just don't think that they're gonna do that. And I'm aware UNLV lost their quarterback, but they have a kid coming back that's playing a lot of football. And I think the quarterback play was kind of partially system driven, but I'm more about the lines, what they have coming back on defense, those kind of things. And I just want to see more of that. And Fresno's another team, Andrew. Yes, they're another team I have my eye on this year too. D. Troll Hunter, G.J. Kinney, and Texas State make their second straight bowl game, and they finish the season ranked ahead of Baylor. I can see that. I don't have high expectations for Baylor this year. I'm going to buy that. Buy, sell, or hold. NC State loses 4 games, including to Louisiana Tech. So let me pull up NC State's schedule because I'm not opposed to your first part, but your second part is where I have some questions, which is what makes it an interesting buy, sell, or hold because it's not easy. So when you say losing 4 games, they play Tennessee in Charlotte. They play at Clemson. They play at Cal, at Georgia Tech, at North Carolina. They have Duke at home, Stanford at home, Syracuse at home, Wake at home, and then Louisiana Tech at home. I could certainly see 4 losses in there. I mean, definitely see a loss to Tennessee. I definitely see a loss at Clemson. I think they'll lose one of the road games to Georgia Tech and North Carolina, if not both of them. So I could certainly see 8-4. I just don't see Louisiana Tech. They are just not good. Louisiana Tech is just not a good football program right now. And so I'm gonna sell that one because of that. I mean, they went 3-9 last year, and their only wins were a 5-point win over Florida International, and a win over Northwestern State, and a win over UTEP. So yeah, I'm gonna sell that one. I like where your head's at though, because it's like that kind of random weird upset that can happen sometimes in college football. And so I like where your head's on that. But the Pac-12 and Mountain West merge and officially select the name Pac Mountain West Conference. I am selling the heck out of that. And here's why I'm selling the heck out of that. I absolutely can see the Pac-12 and the Mountain West merging. I think that could happen absolutely, because there's just a need for it. However, the reason that I'm not going to say that they're going to name it that is because I don't think there's any reason to keep the Mountain West part there. I mean, the Mountain West is going to probably hold on to something, and they may have like a byline underneath or something like that. But the Pac-12 something, and then have Mountain West something, like honorary type of thing. But at the end of the day, the Pac-12 is the bigger brand. So that's just, it's just the bigger brand, in my opinion. Indy JY11, 2+ Biseller hold, 2+ backup quarterbacks. We'll get into 2+ games for Notre Dame in the 2024 season, score related. Yeah, I think we'll see 2 backup quarterbacks get in the game this year. I think we'll see at least 2 games this year where 3 quarterbacks play. We saw that last year. We saw that in, I believe we saw that last year, right? Yeah, we saw that Kenny Minchie got in against Tennessee State, and then he also got in at the end of the game against Pitt. So, yeah, I absolutely buy that. Just Your Ordinary Joe, another one. Next time Notre Dame adds a third position group U, along with tight end U and O-line U, it will be the backfield. I'm going to hold that for now, but it's crazy that I'm holding that. And somebody asked what hold means. Hold means basically like I don't have either a strong opinion either way, or I need to see more. And for me, because I can't sell it because I get the premise, but I can't buy it because I need to see more. So I put a hold on it. I just need to see this secondary be really, really good for multiple years in a row, like at that high elite level. And if they can do that, and I also need to see them start putting some guys in the high aspects of the NFL draft. I mean, they need to start pumping out multiple first rounders and second rounders. That's going to have to happen. So we're a ways away from that, but I could see that. I think that position, the only other position that I think could be in a situation where if they go on a run here of elite play and then high draft picks, could be linebacker. Because I don't think there's like a really strong LBU lock for recently. I mean, there's some past of Miami, Penn State, but as far as recently, I mean, let's say Jack Kaiser's a day 2 pick next year, and then Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed and Kingston Villamasa, Jaden Osby, those guys are legit. There's potential multiple first-round draft picks and Butkus Award winners in that conversation. And now you're like, dude, Notre Dame's got a 4th Butkus Award winner, including Manti, and then Jalen, and now Jeremiah, and now whoever's next. Nobody else is able to do that. And so those are things I look at. Somebody said safety U. They don't normally look at it like that. It's normally DBU, so it's like the whole group is more how it goes. So it's certainly possible. And then could be running back U. Again, I don't see that happen. They are a long way away from that. I think linebacker would make the most sense, in my opinion. We are Notre Dame. Got few of them. Buy, sell, or hold. The SEC will give Notre Dame the same deal as the ACC before they let Notre Dame go to the Big Ten. Finally, somebody gets it. Finally, somebody understands that not every league is out there trying to screw Notre Dame over to get them in their league and the value of Notre Dame. You are 100% correct in that. And what he's saying here is if there's thoughts that the Big Ten, that Notre Dame is going to be forced to join a conference, the SEC has to know that they're not going to join us. If they join a league full time, right now it'll be the ACC. They have to contractually to be the ACC. If the ACC goes away and Notre Dame is somehow forced into a league, it's probably or there's a thought that they can be forced. It's probably the Big Ten. So if you're the SEC and if you're ESPN, you absolutely want that deal with Notre Dame because here's the thing: if let's say in 2 years it looks like Notre Dame's about to join the Big Ten. You are not going to get any Notre Dame games if you're ESPN. None. Because Notre Dame's home and away games will all be part of the same company. It's the NBC, Fox, CBS Sports brand. There's no way ESPN wants to let that happen. So, yes. As a matter of fact, when you're talking about, I would say that they would give them the same deal as far as playing 4 to 5 teams a year, but they would give them way more money than they would the Big Ten than what the ACC is doing, in my opinion. And that would be great for Notre Dame because then they could stay independent, because ultimately Notre Dame wants to stay independent. This notion that all these leagues are going to bully Notre Dame into joining a league, that is nothing but fan fiction. And you say, well, that's just your opinion. No, it's not, because look at 2020. If the ACC wouldn't have brought Notre Dame in, and Notre Dame was a true independent, meaning no affiliate, promise you, Big 12, SEC, somebody would have been like, hey, come play with us for a year. Y'all don't understand the brand power that Notre Dame has. Even Notre Dame fans don't get this, because there's so many Notre Dame fans. What if we have to join why? I mean, guys, think about the deal that Notre Dame just got with the college football playoff. Think about the deal. Notre Dame basically is just guaranteed certain amounts of money, and there's a little bit more to that deal that I don't know that I'm allowed to discuss. That's an even better deal than you even realize. How does Notre Dame keep getting this? Oh, they have won in 30 years. It's not about that. The only league that's ever tried to bully Notre Dame into joining was the Big Ten, and Notre Dame told them to F themselves every time, and they will do it again. They'll do it again. If they join the Big Ten, it's on their terms. I promise you this. There's no appetite that I know of amongst the heavyweight hitters at Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. There just isn't. They would sign a 4-game deal with the Big 12 or a 4-game deal with the SEC before they would be bullied into the Big Ten by the Big Ten. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And people talk about, well, look at all the money that the Big Ten. Yeah, but if you add more teams to it, then that money is less, because it's now being divided up by fewer teams. So, well, what if the ACC goes away and you have to join a league? You guys do know that Notre Dame doesn't have to join a football league for the other sports, right? And y'all do know the Big East is still a thing, right? It is. So I love this. We are Notre Dame, that you get it. You get it. And I'm buying that. He has another one. He or she has another one. Buy, sell, or hold. Marcus Freeman will have multiple top 5 recruiting classes in his time at Notre Dame. I'm by that, because it all goes with what I've said. If Notre Dame starts winning, and you're going to see them start to get the same inflation of their recruits that other schools get, right? Where, right now, like, let's just say hypothetically that I'm right about Elijah Burris, and even I'm even wrong in that he's going to be even better. So Notre Dame signs Elijah Burris, and he gets no bump whatsoever. None. Stays a 3-star. If Notre Dame was getting the same bump that Bama gets, Georgia gets, Ohio State gets, he immediately bumps up to at least a 4-star. And that raises the thing. May not jump into the top 250, but, they'll get there. And so you're just going to – if Notre Dame starts winning every year, 2-3 games in the playoff, and they win a championship, play for another – yeah, you'll see them start to get that inflation bump. Now, what I mean by that is it's not necessarily saying that the players aren't as good as they're making it out to be. My point is, I've said this. Bama will sign a kid or get a commitment from a kid, and the very next ranking, he goes flying up the rankings. Now, the ranking did not make him better. They finally recognized how good he was, and Bama got him. Well, if that same kid would have committed to Vanderbilt, he doesn't get the same bump, meaning – they say, well, look at Bama and Georgia and Ohio State. They get the best recruiting classes because of I've pointed this out. I mean, 6, 7, 8 guys a year will just get these automatic huge bumps just right after they commit to Bama. And my thing is, if those guys would have committed to West Virginia or Kentucky or Vanderbilt, they don't get the same bump, and they would have been wrong on those rankings. So Bama's not winning because as much of they're getting highly ranked recruits. A lot of those highly ranked recruits didn't become highly ranked recruits until they signed with Bama. Now, that's not true for all of them. There's certainly plenty of guys that were already 5-stars. But you need that inflationary bump if you're Notre Dame to be able to compete with the teams that are already getting the inflationary bump. And so, yes, if Notre Dame starts winning the way that I think Marcus Freeman's going to win, then, yeah, he'll start getting top 5 classes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the last one, buy, sell, hold. Al Golden will return to Notre Dame for a 4th season. I'm going to buy that. I could buy that. I just don't know what Al Golden's aspirations are as a coach. I don't know if he wants to be head coach somewhere, if he just kind of likes where he's at. I really don't know. So I'm going to buy it for now, but I'm not buying with great confidence because I don't know Coach Golden at all. I mean, I've had a couple, like, being at press conferences, seen him, but I mean, I don't, and I mean, I've talked to him several times when we were both coaches, but it was just more in passing, and he was very kind and very generous, but I don't know him and don't know his aspirations. So I'm gonna buy that one, but I probably should hold that one because I just don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna hold that one because I just don't know what his aspirations are. Darvis says in 10 years' time, CFB Nation will be the #1 source for college football information, rankings, teams, coverage, etc. Well, I hope so. But it's obviously been very slow going so far. A lot of the things going on with the issues we're having at Irish Breakdown, moving from this company to that, and the podcast changes and all these different things that have happened has really stunted the CFB Nation growth. And so I haven't been able to devote any time into that, but I'm hoping over the next year or so that I will, because I've always said I'm not going to build CFB Nation up at the expense of Irish Breakdown. And when we're not at the point where I can devote the time I need to devote to building that up. But I'm hoping so. I'm definitely hoping so. And then Darvis also says, buy, sell, or hold on National Signing Day. Notre Dame gets a major surprise commit from a player they would absolutely take even if they had achieved number they wanted at the position. I'm going to sell that just because I don't know that we could necessarily it could be a surprise. I mean, we would kind of have an idea that guy would visit at some point in time, and you'd have kind of an idea that they were in the game for that. But I'm going to sell it for now, but I don't think it's out of the question that if Notre Dame's offense goes out and has 40 plus points per game and throws the ball and 7+ yards, per play and all that, like we were talking about earlier, if they have something like that, make a deep playoff run, I could see them flipping a kid, or getting a big time player late in the process. I could see that. But I'm selling it, but I could see it. I don't think it's outlandish to bring it up at all. Aiden Benami had, I think, a couple pages of these. So let's go with this one. Avery Johnson will be better quarterback this upcoming season than Will Howard. I'm gonna sell that as far as better, but I'm gonna say that I think he'll be more dynamic. I think Avery's gonna, he's gonna have young guy problems as a first-year starter. He's gonna turn the ball over a little bit more than you probably should. He's gonna be more inconsistent than when you should. Will Howard will probably be more consistent, more steady. Will Howard's going to have a better team around him, but I think Avery's going to be more dynamic, certainly more dynamic, and I think that's what Kansas State wanted and needed, and that's why they went with him over Will Howard, which I think was the right move. If you're a team like Ohio State, you want the guy that's more steady. When you're a team like K-State, you want the more dynamic guy. Buy, sell, or hold. Keydron Young adjusts right away and is an even better third running back for Notre Dame in 2024. I'm buying that one. Yes, I'm absolutely buying that one. I think if Keydron Young's healthy, he'll be hard to keep off the field as in that third spot. Absolutely. And he's bigger than Jabron Payne. He's more explosive than Jabron Payne. He's not as experienced in the system, but I think he's a smart kid and will get caught up pretty quickly. Buy, sell, or hold. Marcus Freeman on the USS Abraham Lincoln helps his coaching staff and leadership for our Irish. Absolutely. I can't get into details about it because it was an off-the-record conversation, but that was a very eye-opening experience for him, and I absolutely think it'll be one of the many things that helps him become a better leader. Because the thing is, the whole purpose of being there was sort of to help in that regard. And so when you're doing something like that to get a certain experience from it, then it's going to make you better in most cases. So I'm gonna buy that. Benami offering a scholarship to a high school sophomores, and high school is too early. I'm selling that. I mean, I get where you're coming from, but there are certainly kids that should get there, but it's what you have to do. I mean, if you don't, you're just not going to get certain kids. Just understand that. It's just you're not going to get them. And then buy, sell, or hold. America has never seen as an explosive or aggressive indie offense as they will under Coach Denbrock. Well, I don't know that I would say that. Yeah. Oh, boy, Iden, this is a tough one. Because my head goes in a lot of different places. I mean, we talking about this stint of Mike Denbrock, period, because the 15 offense was pretty explosive. You know what? I'm I'm going to buy it because, again, the only offense that I've seen that was as explosive as this one was no, I'm selling it. I mean, we're talking explosive. Statistically, sure, I'd buy it. But if we're just talking about, what we see and feel, it's hard for me to think that this offense is going to be more explosive than an offense that had Tony Rice and Ricky Waters and Rocket Ismail and Anthony Johnson and just the guys that they had back in 88 and 89. I mean, the 89 team especially was super explosive. So I'm going to sell it in that regard. Statistically, I think it'll be better than that offense was, points, yards per play, because of the style of play that team, the triple option style. But, man, that team was so incredibly explosive. So incredibly explosive. So I'm gonna sell that because of that. But I like where your head's at. You made me think about it. When you can kind of get me to start stuttering on my words and like have to pause, I'm like, man, you've done pretty good job with that. Tommy Rock, buy-seller hold. Notre Dame is on the verge of a special run similar to 88 to 94, and will get an 8th Heisman Trophy during this run, as well as at least one championship. Pooh, boy, that's a lot. So I want to buy the run. I want to buy the champion. I've already gone on record as saying that I think they'll win a championship in the next 5 years. I've already gone on record as saying that. The Heisman's the one that gets me, though, just because of the way the process works. I think their guy would have to be so much better than everybody else that it would be almost impossible not to give him that. And I don't know like who that would be. So I'm going to buy the first one, buy the latter part. I'm going to have to sell the middle one. And I know somebody said, well, if they're going to win a championship, then, don't they have to have an elite? Yeah. I think they'll have finalists. Brady was a finalist one year, right? Wasn't Brady a finalist in 05? And then he finished in the top 5. But I just, I don't know if I can get there with the Heisman. I hope that you're right, because that would be a lot of fun to experience that. Willie S. Notre Dame is going to have to force at least 2 players who think they are healthy enough to play into medical retirement. I don't know if it's forcing them. No, I can't force them, so I'm going to sell that. Do I think a couple guys that are on the fence about playing decide to go that route? Yeah, I think that's the case. But no, I don't think they're going to force them to do. I don't know that they can force them to do that. So I'm going to sell that. DJ, the loser of the Georgia-Clemson game still makes the playoff. I'm going to do it one at a time. So, boy. Let me look at Clemson's schedule real quick, because that's going to be the key. Because as of right now, I would pick Clemson or Georgia to win that game as of right now. And so now I got to look and see, what Clemson's schedule is to kind of see if I think that they're going to win the ACC. I have not made my ACC predictions yet. We'll do something like that on the board and on the show during the summer. They get Florida State on the road. They play Louisville at home. They do not play Miami. They get NC State at home. Virginia Tech on the road, that'll be a tough one. So they have a decent ACC schedule. Florida State has to play Clemson at home. They play at SMU, at Miami, North Carolina at home. Neither of them have super crazy schedules. I'm going to say I'm going to sell that, because I don't know. Like, I like Clemson a lot this year. I'm just not sure if I'm quite ready to say they're going to be a playoff team. So I'm going to sell that one. I'd probably maybe lean towards hold that one, but I just got to see. And here's the other thing too, is I don't think Georgia's a playoff team if they lose to Clemson. I don't. When you look at Georgia's schedule, I mean, goodness gracious, if they lose to Clemson, in order to be a playoff team, they can't have more than one loss really the rest of the year. They can't. And that means they'd have to win 2. They can't lose more than one game of at Kentucky, at Alabama, home against Auburn, home against Mississippi State, at Texas, Florida neutral field, at Ole Miss, home against Tennessee. And if you only lose one of those games and you're sitting there at 10-2, you then have to play somebody in the SEC title game. That's going to be brutal. They have to look. The Clemson-Georgia game is way more important for Georgia than it is for Clemson when it comes to a playoff run, in my opinion. Because I think Clemson has a better shot of losing that game and running the table, or going, not 10-1 out of that, winning the ACC title game. Let's say they lose to Florida State, but then Florida State has a couple losses, and then Clemson gets a rematch win in the ACC title game or something like that. Or I could see that much easier than if Georgia loses to Clemson. what does that say about where their team is? I mean, I like Clemson more than most, but that's a game you can't lose for Georgia. And then to play that schedule where you got to play at Bama, at Texas, and at Ole Miss, whoo boy, that's brutal. And at Kentucky, who's given them some tough games, and home against Tennessee, that's going to be rough, man. Really, really, really rough. So I'm selling that one. And the loser of the USC LSU game does not make the playoff. I'm going to agree with that for sure. Look, I don't think LSU. I had to pick today. I'd pick LSU to win that game, not by a lot. And I don't think LSU has any shot to make the playoff. If USC loses that, like USC's best chance to make the playoff is to win that game. So if USC loses that game and they'll lose to Notre Dame, I don't see them being a playoff team. So I'm gonna buy that part of it. I'm gonna buy that one. All right, double bogey like a champion. Nathaniel Usu-Boateng doesn't take all of his officials. Well, that's not really a thing anymore. So I'm gonna sell it because there's no limit now to officials. I think he'll take all of his scheduled officials. So if I were to answer it that way, I'd say that. But I think he'll take all of his scheduled official visits. I don't think he's going to commit anytime soon. Lincoln Riley underachieves and leaves for the NFL because they love offensive gurus. If they underachieve this year, I don't know that the NFL will want him. So I'm going to sell that as well. I don't think they're going to underachieve this season. I really don't. And then Buy-Sell or Hold, Nebraska goes 11-1 and they make the playoff. I am selling that. I do think Nebraska is going to be better. I think that Matt Rule is a very good football coach. I think they've had some good portal success. I think that he's got a lot of guys coming back. I think Nebraska will be a bowl team this year. I like that football team. I don't think they're going to sniff 11-1 though. I don't. And look, I know they got a schedule that's more favorable to a degree for them. And let's just kind of go through it so you guys can see what I'm talking about. They play UTEP in the opener. Then they play Colorado at home, Northern Iowa at home, Illinois at home, at Purdue, home against Rutgers, at Indiana. There's a good chance they're 6-1, 7-0 coming out of that. I mean, I think, look, people just assuming they're going to be 7-0 out of that. I'm like, guys, did we not watch Nebraska last year? I mean, this was not a very good football team last year. They went 5-7 last year. They got blown out by Colorado last year. So y'all may say, hey, well, look, Colorado stinks. Well, so did Nebraska last year. And when the two teams played, Colorado smashed them. So I don't think it's a given that they're going to beat Colorado, but you're at home, you should. It's not a given they're going to beat Illinois. It's not a given they're going to beat Rutgers. Guys, Rutgers is a good football team last year. And then Purdue should be a win. And then Indiana should be a win. Then after that, you've got at Ohio State. That's a loss. Home against UCLA. At USC, that's a loss. Home against Wisconsin, that won't be easy. And at Iowa, that's at least 3 losses right there. So they'll be better, but they're not going to be 11-1. No way. They're not going to sniff 11-1. But they're going to be a lot better. I mean, I could see them being an 8-4 football team this year. I do, but 11-1 is definitely selling that. Onward to victory with 3 of them. So he said I have to give a buy, sell, or hold to each one. So Jaden Greathouse, buy, sell, or hold, Jaden Greathouse, Chris Mitchell, and Jordan Faison equals, and this is for receiving, equals 1,900 yards. So basically each guy needs to average 634 yards to get to that level. I'm going to sell that because I don't think all 3 of those guys get to that type of level. I could see, obviously, if one guy gets to 800, then the other guy doesn't have to. But I'm going to sell that just partly because of the second part and the third parts, which is there's so many other weapons. Buy, sell, or hold, Jaden Thomas, Bo Collins, Deion Colsey, and Jaden Harrison equals 1,000 yards. That I'm buying because that's 250 yards each. So, yeah, that I'm buying that one. And then buy, sell, or hold, the running backs and tight ends equal 1,000 yards. Oh, boy. I mean, where were they at last year? What did your tight ends and running backs do last year at Notre Dame? Let's do the math here real quick on where they were last year. Now, again, I think the ball is going to be spread around more this year, but I also think they're going to pass more this year. So last year, Mitchell Evans had 422, and Holden Stace had 176. You had 51 from Eli Raridan, and then 637 from Cooper Flanagan and Davis Sherwood. So your tight ends were at 686. Then you had your running backs. You had Jeremiah Love had 77. Jadarian Price had 65. You had 58 from Jabron Payne. You had 34 from Devin Ford and then 4 from Chase. I mean, you had 924 last year from that group, and I think you're going to use the running backs a lot more this year. So I'm going to buy that. I'm going to buy that one. Yeah, I think that's a good number. I think it's a good number. Some sell, buy, and buy is what I think they're going to do. Indy Joe 14. Christian Gray and the other safety opposing Xavier Watts will have more interceptions and breakups combined than Morrison and Watts combined. I'm going to sell that, and I understand where you're coming from, and I'm sympathetic. I think someone other than one of those two will lead the team in interceptions, but you can't completely avoid those two players. You can. And the Notre Dame coaching staff is smart enough to know they've got to get them in position to be able to make some of those plays. You can't avoid both of them, because the thing, too, is they're on the opposite side of the field. I mean, Xavier Watts is a field safety primarily, and Benjamin Morrison's the boundary corner. You can't avoid both of them. Just can't. So the only way that happens to me is if one of them misses a big chunk of the season. So I'm going to sell that. And then Floating Irish, the commitments of Deuce Knight and Noah Grubbs are better than the commitments of Jimmy Clausen and Dane Christ. Boy. I mean, as far as what they turn out to be as players, no, I'm selling that. I mean, could they end up being so? Sure. But, I mean, neither one of those guys has played a game as seniors in high school. And Jimmy Clausen was one of the best high school quarterbacks I've ever seen. And Dane Christ was an excellent prospect as well. They got ruined in college, but if we're talking from a recruiting standpoint, I'm selling that for sure. If we're talking about what they turned into in college, we can only hope that one of those two guys is as good as what Jimmy Clausen was in 2009. And if one of those guys are as good as what Jimmy was in 2009, then Notre Dame's going to definitely win a championship. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Could you imagine Jimmy Clausen playing in college with the defense, offensive line, and running backs and overall skill talent? I mean, he had great receivers. He had terrible defenses, bad offensive lines. Could you imagine Jimmy playing with like the 15 roster or the 23 roster even? But that one would maybe be a little, not 23 roster, 24 roster. Like that would be so much fun. So much fun to see. I mean, Noah Grubbs hasn't even played as a junior. He just finished his sophomore year of high school. I'm not comparing him to Dane Christ and Jimmy Clausen yet. Give me a couple of years and then we can be able to say it better. But those guys were phenomenal prospects. They just were part of bad situations or bad coaching staffs. And then Riker Ferg, the recruiting of players and results on field of players like Deuce Knight and Noah Grubbs from Southern public schools will result in more kids in public schools across the country to have more interest playing for Notre Dame. I'm going to sell that because I don't think the interest is so much about those guys being from public schools. I don't think a lot of kids look at it so much and say, well, this guy's from a public school kid too. Here, I talk a lot about this, Riker. And the reason I talk about it is not so much that, oh, look, public school kids are becoming more interested. There's something to that, but it's more so about they're fighting those battles now and winning. Whereas in the past, they just wouldn't fight those battles. They would immediately go to the private schools for most kids in the South. I think the only guy that I can remember that really would battle for public school kids is really only Tony Alford, who got Devin Studstill and Tavon Coney and some of those guys, Kevin Stefferson, some of those guys. Mike Denbrock would do that a little bit with like Stefferson, but it's more so the results that Notre Dame has on the field and then fighting those fights and actually trying to get those kids is why we'll see a greater impact from them, in my opinion. And that is it. So we got one more super chat I wanted to bring up. Aiden Benami had a super chat. What happened with the Rowan Byrne recruitment? They got better players. I mean, thank you for super chat, Aiden, but it really is that simple. I'm not even being flippant at all. They just had better players on the board. They liked Maddie Augustine better. They liked Will Black better. They liked Owen Shrevik better. And I do as well. And so that's really what it comes down. I liked Rowan Byrne, and if you wanted to go get him, okay, cool. I'm fine with that. But they need more tackle types, and Rowan's a pure inside guy. They have a lot of inside guys on the roster. They need more edge players. And then you can move those edge players inside if the opportunity rises. And so I think it's more about the need, and they just have better players. So that's where they are with that one. So thank you for the super chat idea. And that's going to do it, everybody. Thanks for being with me today. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. If you haven't done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And right now, head on over to the guys who are getting ready to go live. They're going live right now on the Ivy Nation Sports Talk. So you're going to want to join them for their midweek mailbag, their Wednesday mailbag. So check that out now. They got the countdown rolling right now. So go join Sean and Vince and the team for Ivy Nation Sports Talk tonight. And I'll talk to you all again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.